I'm not going to let you leave him. No way. Mom's right. I can't even walk. That's what my mother-in-law and my husband told me. I married my husband Mark because I loved him. Even though we're not romantically involved anymore, I still care for him deeply as family. My mother-in-law could be strict, but she was never unreasonable. Mark always stood up for me. Then one day, he got into a terrible car accident. It was really bad, and he fell unconscious. While I was visiting him at the hospital and dealing with everything, I checked the car's dashcam footage. When I saw what happened, I couldn't believe it. I realized I could never forgive Mark. It felt like everything we had shared was a lie. When he woke up, now in a wheelchair, I decided to leave him. My name is Clara, and I'm 35. I'm a housewife. My husband Mark and I had been married for 2 years. I had been depressed for a long time after my ex-boyfriend, who promised to marry me, suddenly dumped me. I met Mark at a party that my friends insisted I attend because they were worried about me. I had started working part-time after college because I wanted to marry my ex-boyfriend. He was kind, and I thought we would build a peaceful life together. But one day, he told me he had fallen for someone else, broke up with me, and offered to pay me alimony for breaking off our engagement. I refused and left his place. My now husband Mark showed up at the party where my friends took me. Clara, right? I'm Mark. Your friends told me you've been going through a tough time. He asked me to talk to him because my friends had told him about my troubles. I've been scared to get close to anyone since my ex hurt me. It's been so long since I've been out at a party like this. That's understandable, but sometimes it's worth it to take the first step. I know how it feels to be betrayed. I've been there too. But don't waste time being sad. Let's just enjoy today. Something in my heart lightened when he said that. We drank and had a good time that night. Mark and I exchanged contact info. The next day, he texted me and we agreed to go for dinner. Talking with him helped me forget about my ex. After seeing Mark for a while, I realized I wasn't thinking about my ex anymore, even when I was alone. I'm happy to see you getting better every day. I'll keep doing my best to make you happy. Let's stay together, Clara. I'll never hurt you. When he said that, I knew I could trust him. We officially started dating, and life felt so happy and complete. Even though Mark was my age, he was very reliable. Whenever I had a rough day, he always cheered me up, just like when we first met. My friends were amazed at how much I had changed since I was so depressed before. After a year of dating, Mark proposed and we decided to get married. I was so excited to marry the man I loved. When we visited my in-laws for the first time, I was so nervous I couldn't stop sweating. My father-in-law was quiet, but he tried to make me feel comfortable. Mark even showed me old childhood pictures to help ease my nerves. My mother-in-law was cheerful and very direct. I don't know why you were so nervous. I'm not against you two getting married. We're family now, she said, patting my back and laughing. Her words made me feel much better. I'll teach you how to manage the house, and I'll be strict with you. Mom, Clara can do all of that herself with your advice. She doesn't need you to be hard on her. Mark laughed and defended me. My mother-in-law just smiled and said, I'm just kidding. Although my in-laws lived far away, we had a good relationship, or so I thought. At our wedding, so many of our friends came to celebrate. I was so happy I cried a lot. In the first few years of marriage, we were deeply in love. I looked forward to when Mark would come home from work every day, and I always made sure a delicious dinner was ready for him. Mark worked a lot of overtime, but no matter how late he came home, he always ate my dinner and complimented my cooking. I loved hearing him praise my meals. In my free time, I searched for new recipes and learned to cook even more dishes. During New Year's, we visited my parents' house together. My mother-in-law always taught me how to cook new things. You should buy an Instant Pot. This meat is so tender, right? Sometimes she was blunt, but often she was just trying to help. What are you doing? You need to work smarter, not harder. I wasn't used to cooking for a large group, just for Mark and me, but I took her advice seriously and learned a lot. My in-laws weren't bad people, and overall, I thought we were living peacefully. But maybe you're happy with just the two of you now. You should think about having kids soon. The only time I felt hurt was when my mother-in-law mentioned children. It's not that we don't want kids. Of course we do, but it's not that simple. My husband, Luke, and I had talked about it and decided not to pursue fertility treatments. It might have been our fault for not explaining things to my mother-in-law, but every time we saw her, she would bring up the topic of kids. "Mom, we have our own timing," Luke would say quickly when he was there. When Luke wasn't around, I just had to smile and pretend everything was fine. Sometimes I hear that my in-laws were coming over to visit. I didn't want my mother-in-law to say anything, so I cleaned the house thoroughly and cooked elaborate meals. I made sure everything was perfect. She never commented on the house, but she always brought up having children. Every time, Luke defended me. 5 years had passed since we got married. Unlike when we first married, we weren't as close as lovers anymore. But that didn't mean I didn't love him. I still did. And we had become more like family. I'm sure Luke felt the same way. No matter how late he came home, he would always eat my cooking. We never had children, but I thought we had a good relationship. I figured that no matter how old we got, we would live together in the same way. My relationship with my in-laws hadn't changed much, and we still saw each other a few times a year. The only difference now was that I could stand up to my mother-in-law a little bit more. She would always talk to me about having kids. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. Now I could joke about it a bit. My mother-in-law didn't get upset anymore. "I know, but I can't help saying it. I'm sorry." She would laugh along with me. Then one day, I got a call from an unknown number. "Hello, is this Luke's wife? Your husband has been in an accident and is at the hospital. Please come right away." I was so shocked that I could barely understand what was happening. I quickly took a cab to the hospital. Coincidentally, my in-laws were visiting that week. On the way there, I called my mother-in-law. "Mom, it's Luke. It's Luke." "What? What's wrong?" "Jana, something happened to Luke. He had an accident and was taken to the hospital." I couldn't speak properly because I was crying so hard, but my mother-in-law understood immediately. She and my father-in-law were on a sightseeing trip, but they agreed to come to the hospital right away. When I got to the hospital, my husband, Luke, was in surgery. He had been driving when another car hit him from behind. The other car was speeding and hit him hard. The doctors said he was unconscious and in critical condition. I broke down in tears, but my mother-in-law reassured me, saying, "Luke will be fine. We just have to wait and trust him." I felt bad that my in-laws were so worried about me, even though they must have been feeling scared too. It took a long time, but the surgery was a success, and Luke survived. My in-laws and I cried with relief. Afterward, Luke didn't regain consciousness right away. My in-laws and I took turns watching over him, hoping he'd wake up. While my in-laws stayed at the church, I was busy handling all the accident-related stuff. The police told me Luke was the victim in a crash, and the other driver was arrested for reckless driving. However, the other driver said that Luke was also at fault. I wanted to protect my husband, so I went to the scene of the accident. The car was so damaged I thought the dashcam footage might have been destroyed, but luckily it was still intact. I took the SD card and watched the footage on my laptop. After that, I headed to the hospital to swap with my mother-in-law. Just as I was almost there, I got a call from her. "Gianna, Luke is awake." She sounded so happy. I rushed to the hospital. "Thank goodness, Luke, you're awake." When I arrived, I heard my mother-in-law's voice. Luke was talking as if he had just been sleeping. "Oh, I was in an accident. I don't remember." After hearing that, his doctor came in to check on him, and we all spoke to Luke. My father-in-law also arrived with my mother-in-law. The doctor said the surgery was a success, but they weren't sure if Luke would be able to walk again. They told us he'd be in a wheelchair for a while and would need physical therapy, but they couldn't promise he'd ever walk again. The mood in the room changed as soon as Luke heard this. "What? I can't walk." After the doctor left, Luke murmured to himself. My mother-in-law said, "We'll help you as much as we can. Let's do our best in physical therapy so you can walk again. Right, Gianna?" Instead of agreeing with her, I said, "No, I'm leaving him. I want a divorce." Everyone was shocked by my sudden response. "What are you talking about? In a situation like this, I won't let you divorce my son. You heartless woman." My mother-in-law yelled at me. Luke added, "Yeah, Mom's right. I can't even walk. How could you leave me?" My father-in-law was too stunned to speak. Then I took out my laptop and showed them a video. "What if someone finds out? Already? It's fine. We're on break. No one from the office will be around. Your wife could be watching." The video showed my husband and a young woman talking and kissing. She was wearing the uniform of the company where Luke worked. The conversation made it clear that he had been having an affair with this woman. "What is this?" my father-in-law asked, shocked. Luke stammered, No, it was just a fling. There's nothing between me and this woman." My mother-in-law was speechless, probably in shock. I stayed quiet and played the next video. "I'm not happy with my wife. We're getting divorced soon, so let's get married." "Really? Will you marry me?" In this video, Luke and the woman were giggling and making plans to get married. How disgusting. "What are you doing, Luke?" My father-in-law, who was usually calm, was now furious. "Luke, you shouldn't have cheated on your wife. Apologize to Gianna, and Gianna, please forgive him. Luke can't hurt you anymore, not with what's happened." My mother-in-law, who had been quiet until now, started to defend her son. "Well, I want you to watch something else." Then I played another video. It showed my mother-in-law and Luke. "I want to see my grandchildren's face," my mother-in-law said. "Mom, don't tell Dad, but I'm thinking about divorcing Jana and remarrying. The next one will be younger, so you'll get to see your grandchild soon," my husband Luke replied. "Oh, that sounds great, but if you cheat on your wife, she'll take all the money." "Don't worry, I'm making sure she never finds out. As long as I come home and eat, that's all that matters to Jana. She's happy as long as I eat her cooking. She doesn't seem suspicious. I'll be smart about it." "You're so clever. I can't wait to see my grandchildren," my mother-in-law said, agreeing with his plan. My mother-in-law knew about the affair and was happy that her son would divorce me to have children with a younger woman. "This is disgusting. How dare you talk like that? I don't want a son or a daughter-in-law like this," my father-in-law shouted, his face red with anger. My husband and mother-in-law looked uncomfortable, unsure of what to do. "Who's the heartless one here? I'm definitely divorcing you. Why should I help you after everything you've done? Be happy with your young lover. Goodbye." Ignoring my husband's calls, I walked out of the hospital. My father-in-law followed me. "Gianna, I'm so sorry," he said, bowing deeply. "It's not your fault. Thank you for everything. Please tell him that my lawyer will be in touch." Once I was out of the hospital, the tears I had been holding back started to flow. I couldn't believe how long I'd been deceived, but now that I knew the truth, I felt relieved to be leaving him. The divorce went through smoothly. I received a large settlement, including alimony. My lawyer told me that my ex-husband's affair was with a 20-year-old receptionist at his company. They used to meet on lunch breaks a few blocks away from the office, then go back to work separately. The accident happened while Luke was returning to his office alone. I had been suspicious of the circumstances of the accident, but after hearing what happened, it made sense. My lawyer told me that sometimes Luke and his lover would take half a day off to visit her house, and he had been very careful to keep it a secret from me. I don't think Luke ever thought it would be exposed like this. As the affair became known within the company, Luke had to quit his job, and his young lover had to leave too. She had no savings and had to borrow money to pay her share of the alimony. At the same time, my parents-in-law divorced. My father-in-law couldn't forgive my mother-in-law either. I was surprised to hear from him that my mother-in-law had rented a small apartment, and they were living separately. After Luke's accident, they couldn't afford a house that could accommodate his wheelchair, especially after paying alimony. Luke was undergoing physical therapy, but it seemed unlikely he would walk again. His young lover left him when she realized that he might never walk again. I've been living alone for a while now, and for the first time in a long time, I feel free. I'm studying to become a certified public accountant. If I pass the exam, I might be able to get a permanent job through a friend's recommendation. I'm excited about this new chapter in my life, and I'm determined to enjoy every minute of it. Receiving an allowance without having to do household chores might sound ideal at first, but living with my mother-in-law, Doris, adds complexities to what could be an easy arrangement. As a 34-year-old web designer, I've adjusted to the ups and downs of freelancing, but Doris's constant sarcasm often dims the perks of this lifestyle. My husband, Bobby, and I face various challenges living with her, mostly because of our differing views on work and home responsibilities. After getting married, I transitioned from a corporate job to freelancing, a change that was well received by my former employer and myself. It's allowed me to maintain a steady stream of projects with familiar clients, freed me from daily commutes, and given me more time to focus on our home. Despite the benefits and Bobby's supportive attitude, Doris clings to her traditional beliefs about marriage and the role of a wife. In her mind, a wife should primarily be a homemaker, and she regularly makes her views known, dismissing the idea of modern shared responsibilities between spouses. To Doris, my freelance work seems insignificant, and she believes it doesn't contribute meaningfully to the household finances. I try my best to balance my web design projects with household chores when I have free time. But no matter what I do, Doris's opinions remain unchanged. Her dissatisfaction seems to stem from the contrast between my contemporary approach to work-life balance and her more traditional expectations. She likely views me as an outsider disrupting her family dynamic, especially since she's grown more reliant on Bobby since his father passed away 4 years ago. We live in the home Bobby's father purchased, which Doris now owns outright, thanks to life insurance settling the mortgage. This house serves as the backdrop for our intergenerational tensions, and navigating daily life here means managing conflicting perspectives while trying to respect both the old and new ways of family life. Despite the occasional tensions, the house, with its thoughtful design, comfortably accommodates our small family and provides me with the perfect workspace. It also doubles as a popular gathering spot for Doris's friends, many of whom have lived in the neighborhood for over 25 years. When they visit, the atmosphere shifts, and I often find myself playing the role of a gracious hostess, serving coffee and sweets as the group chats. Inevitably, their conversations drift toward sharing grievances about their daughters-in-law, a recurring topic of discussion. I sometimes find myself chuckling as Doris and her friends swap stories about their daughters-in-law. One tale that always gets a reaction is about a daughter-in-law who frequently flees to her parents' home after minor disagreements, sometimes staying away for nearly half the year. They label her as financially reckless, shaking their heads as they recount how her behavior has left their sons bewildered and even brought debt collectors to their doors. These discussions, which often take place near my workspace, sometimes turn into a sort of informal competition, each woman trying to outdo the others with stories of their troublesome daughters-in-law. Praises for daughters-in-law are rare in these sessions. However, on the rare occasion that one is commended for efficiently managing the household while holding down a job, Doris's reaction is always the same: sour. She dismisses such efforts with a casual wave of her hand, reducing my own freelance work to nothing more than a side gig. Even as the room fills with laughter, the blend of humor and critique reveals a lot about the generational divide in values and expectations surrounding family roles. These moments make it clear just how challenging it can be to reconcile traditional views with modern family dynamics. Amid the lively discussions and laughter that echo through our living room when Doris hosts her friends, my job often becomes the subject of scrutiny. Doris loudly questions the value of my work, openly wondering how much I actually make. This shift in the conversation inevitably leads to a discussion of the spending habits of daughters-in-law, with sharp contrasts drawn between their spending and the old-fashioned belief that the husband's income should be the family's primary support. The room always bursts into laughter, finding humor in the seemingly outdated nature of such expectations, even as these beliefs still linger in the background. I often feel overwhelmed by the repetitive stories and outdated views expressed during Doris's gatherings. To cope, I slip on my headphones and try to drown out the constant undercurrent of belittlement aimed at modern daughters-in-law, myself included. One evening at a family dinner, when Bobby suggested buying a new car, Doris immediately questioned why he needed my approval for such a decision. Despite Bobby's efforts to explain that we make major decisions together as a family, Doris insisted that since he had the driver's license, he should choose whatever car he wanted without my input. Caught in this tug-of-war, I tactfully deferred the decision back to him, a moment that perfectly encapsulated the complex dynamics at play in our household. Bobby, raised to value mutual decision-making, consistently seeks both my and his mother's input on major choices. Meanwhile, Doris, shaped by her late husband's more patriarchal approach, clings to the belief that such independence is normal. Every time Bobby asks for my opinion, it irritates her, leading to accusations that I'm too controlling. This recurring theme in our interactions reveals the tension between traditional and contemporary values in our family life, highlighting the difficulty of balancing respect for the past with the realities of a modern partnership. Struggling to respond to Doris's criticisms, I've come to recognize that I do tend to express my concerns rather than make decisions unilaterally. But my dismay grew when, during a recent argument, Bobby sided with his mother, blaming my vocal nature for his habit of consulting me before making any decisions. Several months into our marriage, it became clear that he rarely defended me in front of his mother. Even in private, his apologies and assurances that he prioritized our relationship started to feel hollow. This realization deepened with the car buying incident, which cast a long shadow over our relationship. Bobby, who had initially seemed considerate, ultimately failed to support me in front of his mother, raising serious doubts about our future together. I began wishing he wouldn't mistake his indecisiveness for kindness and hoped Doris would be more direct in her communication. A month later, Bobby's new car finally arrived. He and Doris were thrilled, inviting me for a celebratory drive. But the mood quickly shifted when the cost of the car was revealed, a staggering $300,000. This impulsive purchase, made without any real discussion, felt like the final straw in an already strained dynamic. I confronted my husband about the financial implications of such an extravagant purchase, but he brushed me off with dismissive responses, casually suggesting that we could just take out a loan. Doris immediately jumped to his defense, scolding me for questioning the expense. According to her, I had given Bobby the freedom to make his own choice, so why was I complaining now? Frustrated, I asked how we could possibly afford such a luxury, but Doris cut me off sharply. It's not like you pay for anything, so you have no right to complain. Feeling utterly unheard and marginalized in decisions that directly affected our shared life, I was left grappling with a sense of isolation in my own home. It became clear that my input was undervalued and that financial decisions were being made with little regard for joint consultation or responsibility. As I tried to assert my contributions to the household through my freelance work, Doris's reaction was unusually harsh. She scoffed at my efforts, dismissing my income as a little side job that couldn't compare to Bobby's substantial salary of over $130,000 a year. Her disdain was palpable, and just as I was about to defend myself, I noticed my husband had silently withdrawn from the confrontation, leaving me alone to face his mother's harsh words. After enduring this kind of treatment for too long, I finally reached my breaking point when Doris snapped, "A daughter-in-law, like you should just get out." Her words hit me like a slap in the face, not just an insult but a total dismissal of everything I had tolerated. Angered and deeply disappointed by Bobby's indifference, I turned to him and blamed him for the escalating conflict, knowing it stemmed from his chronic inability to stand up for me. Fed up, I said firmly, "Understood. Then I will leave." I walked to my workspace, gathered my computer and essentials, and prepared to leave. As I crossed the threshold, I informed Doris that I would return later to collect the rest of my belongings. Her angry gaze followed me, and just as I stepped out the door, she shouted after me, "When you step into this house again, it will be to sign the divorce papers." Her abrasive words echoed behind me, something I had never expected to hear, and they stunned me into silence. I sought refuge at my parents' house, shaken and unsure of what to do next. The moment my mother saw me, she knew something was wrong. She asked gently, "What happened?" Struggling to articulate the full weight of the events, I stood there, lost for words, feeling the heaviness of everything I had just walked away from. I shared my regrets with my parents, expressing how much my husband had changed from the man who once cherished me deeply. Talking through the situation brought some relief, and with no children complicating matters, my mother gently suggested I consider divorce sooner rather than later, especially since I was financially independent. Over the weekend, with my father's support, I began taking the necessary steps toward a new beginning, contemplating the future that, though uncertain, promised peace and self-respect. I returned to collect my belongings from the house I had shared with my husband and his mother. Both of them seemed to avoid any final confrontation. Standing outside my husband's room, I spoke softly, "You took care of me for a long time. Can you sign the divorce papers?" I slipped the documents under the door, and soon after, I heard his indifferent reply, "I've signed them. We're done here." Retrieving the signed papers felt like a hollow victory, marking the end of our marriage. I left without a word to my mother-in-law, carrying the deep sadness after 3 years in that house, a place with only a handful of happy memories. I went straight to the city office to submit the divorce papers, hoping the formal separation would help bring closure to this chapter of my life. My plan was to temporarily move back to my parents' home and continue working remotely as I started to rebuild my life independently. My mother suggested I stay with them for a while, reassuring me that it would be less worrying than living alone. My father shared similar concerns, cautioning that Bobby and his mother might unpredictably show up at my door. Although I initially thought that scenario was unlikely, living at my parents' home brought unexpected comfort. Thankfully, my job's flexibility allowed me to work remotely, and I extended my stay with ease. 3 months passed, and as Bobby and his mother slowly faded into distant memories, an unknown number suddenly appeared on my phone. Initially hesitant, I considered it might be a mistake or an unwelcome reminder of my past. After several persistent calls, I finally answered, only to hear my ex-husband's frantic voice on the other end. "Why didn't you answer the phone earlier?" he asked, sounding confused and somewhat panicked. Prepared to end the conversation quickly, I calmly replied, "There's no reason for us to communicate anymore," making it clear that I had moved on and had no interest in reopening old wounds. I was about to hang up, but his next question caught me off guard. "Wait a minute, why isn't my smartphone working?" he inquired. With little interest, I suggested he contact the phone company, but then a thought struck me. I asked if he had been making regular deposits into the joint bank account we used to share. Previously, we both contributed to this account, my steady salary along with his more variable income from selling health products, which was often insufficient due to its performance-based nature. Normally, I topped up the account at the end of each month, but for the last 4 months, only his contributions had been made. It dawned on me that I had left in the middle of the month, and the payments for the new car loan might have already begun. My ex-husband fell silent as the realization hit him. Calmly, I stated, "I've been managing our household expenses with my income until now. From this point forward, you'll need to take care of your own living expenses." Internally, I wanted to tell him, "You reap what you sow," but I held back and quietly ended the call. Reflecting on the situation, I realized that my ex-husband had never fully disclosed his actual earnings to his mother. She seemed unaware that our household had been primarily supported by my salary after we got married. Perhaps he was too embarrassed to admit that his wife was the main earner. It was clear that basic utilities like electricity and water shouldn't be disrupted so easily, which pointed to a deeper issue of financial mismanagement and lack of transparency. One of the many problems that had plagued our relationship. The fact that his mobile service was the first luxury to go was telling. One holiday morning, the house intercom buzzed insistently, signaling an issue at the door. My father responded sternly to the visitor, "We don't want to be involved with you anymore. Please leave." Sensing the gravity of the situation, I hurried to the entrance alongside my mother. Through the intercom we heard the familiar voice of my former mother-in-law, pleading for a moment to talk. As I faced her just as my father had predicted, anger was evident on her face. She immediately launched into accusations, blaming me for not making the usual monthly deposits, which she claimed had led to their utilities being cut off. We were all taken aback, unsure of what she meant. My ex-husband attempted to step in, saying, "Mom, stop it. Doris is no longer involved with us." But his mother brushed him aside, continuing her tirade. "Bobby earns $7,500 a month. How could this happen?" she exclaimed. Her fury revealed the depth of their financial disarray, and in that moment, it became clear just how much they had relied on me, both emotionally and financially. I responded quietly, correcting her. The $7,500 was my income, not Bobby's. Shocked by this revelation, she turned to my ex-husband, who reluctantly admitted that his actual take-home pay was far less. My former mother-in-law looked at me in astonishment, unable to comprehend the truth. I explained that my income came from a steady job, not just an allowance. She then turned to Bobby and asked again about his earnings. He sheepishly confirmed what I had said, his own contributions amounting to about $1,500 monthly. After a moment of stunned silence, she made an astonishing proposal. "Doris, how about coming back?" It seemed ludicrous that she would ask me to return after insisting I leave in the first place. I refused firmly, making it clear there was no going back to the way things were. "We're already divorced," I stated bluntly, "and this is no longer my concern." Despite my clear refusal, she persisted, insisting that everything could be resolved if I'd just reconciled with Bobby. My father, growing increasingly impatient, spoke in a forceful tone. "Leave now," he demanded, "or I'll call the police." They left in a hurry, almost stumbling as they exited, my father sternly warning them never to set foot in our home again. Reflecting on the encounter, my mother was visibly furious, but my father's indignation was even more pronounced. I felt a deep sense of relief that we had finally severed ties with such unreasonable people. As time went on, I learned through a mutual acquaintance of Bobby's that his hardships had only deepened. He was forced to give up his parents' house and the land, moving into a modest apartment with his mother. The new car, which was rarely used, had been sold off to settle the remaining loan. Even after clearing his debts, Bobby continued down a path of financial irresponsibility, squandering what little he had left on gambling. Eventually, his whereabouts became unknown. Meanwhile, my former mother-in-law was diagnosed with dementia and now resides in a nursing home. On a brighter note, my career is thriving, and I am living independently. Recently, I started dating a colleague who is well aware of my past marriage. Unlike Bobby, he is dedicated to his job, financially responsible, and doesn't depend on his spouse for income or engage in reckless spending. While we haven't explicitly discussed marriage, I feel confident about our future together, sensing a genuine potential in our relationship that I never experienced before. During dinner at a restaurant, my mother-in-law made a deeply hurtful remark, suggesting that I didn't belong simply because I wasn't related by blood. Her words stung, making me feel undervalued, and I had the sudden urge to leave. As I rose to go, she demanded that I pay for the meal since I was leaving early. Feeling mistreated, I refused to pay for everyone else's dinner. My name is Samantha, and I work in an office. My husband, Peter, and I have a generally happy marriage, but there's one significant issue: his mother. She constantly criticizes me and interferes in our lives. Although I've shared my concerns with Peter, he doesn't see it as a problem, believing her actions are just signs of affection. Over time, her intrusions worsened. She had a key to our home, given to her by Peter, and would let herself in uninvited, critiquing everything from my housekeeping to spreading unfounded rumors about me to our neighbors. I begged Peter to consider moving, but he was too preoccupied with work to address the situation. Then came a turning point. Peter received a significant promotion and a raise after completing a major project. I saw this as a chance for a fresh start and suggested we think about starting a family now that we were financially stable. I hoped this would make him realize the negative impact his mother was having on our lives and see the need for change. However, Peter had a different perspective. He believed that if we were going to start a family, we should live in a more child-friendly town with good daycare options and parks, unlike our current neighborhood. After some discussion, Peter finally agreed to move, and I was thrilled. But my joy was short-lived. The very next day, my mother-in-law showed up unannounced, as usual. I braced myself for her typical criticisms, but she was surprisingly pleasant. She came to celebrate Peter's recent success and invited us to dinner at a fancy restaurant known for its exceptional food and service. "It's posh, and everyone raves about it," she said, inviting me to join her. "That sounds nice," I replied, keeping my tone polite despite my lingering frustration with her. "Clear your schedule. I really want you to come," she insisted, ignoring my attempts to decline. "Don't say no. We want you there," she added firmly, leaving me no choice. After she left, smirking, I felt something was off. She had excluded me from events before, but now she was adamant about including me. Later, I discussed it with Peter, who revealed that his mother had already arranged for us all to attend together, specifically choosing this restaurant to celebrate as a family. This sudden shift in her behavior left me conflicted. Peter was excited about the dinner. "Don't you feel the same, Samantha?" he asked. But I couldn't share his enthusiasm. "Sorry, but I'm not excited. I'm worried about how much it's going to cost at such an expensive restaurant," I admitted, my unease growing with each passing moment. "I don't want to go. Just tell them I have something urgent and enjoy yourself," I told Peter, feeling a growing sense of unease about the dinner. "Why are you being so negative?" he asked, clearly frustrated. "It's not just us. My brothers and their wives are coming too. It would look bad if you weren't there with the whole family." I could see how excited he was about dining at such a fancy venue for the first time, but I felt trapped. My reluctance was brushed aside, and it seemed like my husband was more aligned with his mother's perspective than mine. Feeling unsupported and desperate, I took a drastic step. I ordered a voice recorder online, suspecting that the harassment from my mother-in-law wouldn't end at this celebration. I planned to discreetly record her behavior, hoping it would finally make Peter understand what I had been enduring. If he continued to dismiss my concerns, I even considered divorce. Oddly, preparing for that possibility brought me a slight sense of relief. As the day of the dinner approached, I felt somber and filled with apprehension. I hardly knew Peter's brothers, having only met them briefly at our wedding, and my interactions with their wives were limited to basic pleasantries. When we arrived at the restaurant, we were escorted to a private room. Inside, my mother-in-law, Peter's brothers, and their wives were already seated. Peter glanced around, perplexed. "Did the waiter get the seating wrong?" he asked, noticing there was no seat for me. "I'll go ask. Everyone please start without me." He stepped out of the room to speak with the staff. As soon as he was gone, my mother-in-law stood up, her expression cold and stern. "There's no seat for you," she said, her tone biting. "Why would I invite a stranger who just married my son to a family celebration?" Her words stung, but before I could respond, she continued, "You have a choice. Prove you really want to be part of this family, or leave and never come back. Decide now." I didn't hesitate. "I'm leaving," I said firmly, rising from the table without a second glance. "I'm leaving," I stated firmly, without a moment's hesitation. My mother-in-law looked startled, as if she had expected me to beg for her acceptance instead. "Listen to me carefully," she continued, undeterred by my response. "If you pay the entire bill for everyone here, I'll acknowledge you as Peter's wife. I understand you must feel frustrated being treated like an outsider. So pay up and become part of the family." "I already told you, I'm leaving. Why should I cover the expenses for someone else's family gathering?" I retorted, turning to go. She slammed her hand on the table and raised her voice. "Can't you see I'm offering you a chance to be part of the family? Are you really okay with remaining a stranger? Pay up." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm perfectly fine being seen as a stranger. And since I'm not family, I won't be paying for your meal. Goodbye, mother-in-law." With finality, I turned and walked out of the room. She tried to follow, but by the time she reached the doorway, I was already gone, leaving the confrontation and the oppressive dinner behind me. By the time I reached the exit of the restaurant, I was determined to go straight home and send Peter an email explaining the entire ordeal. To my surprise, he arrived home just 15 minutes after I did. He explained that the waiter had confirmed there was no mistake with the reservation. My mother-in-law had deliberately caused the scene. It turned out that my decision to stand up for myself had a ripple effect. The wives of Peter's brothers had witnessed the incident, and their perspective on the family dynamics shifted dramatically. The wives who had silently endured similar mistreatment from my mother-in-law found strength in my actions. Emboldened by my stand, they too decided to leave the restaurant, making a decisive statement of solidarity. Their husbands, the eldest and third sons, quickly followed them out. I braced myself for the inevitable backlash, and sure enough, within 4 hours, my phone began ringing nonstop. It became so incessant that I eventually blocked her number, but one call slipped through from an unknown number. "Hello, sorry for calling so late. Is this Samantha's mobile phone?" The man on the line introduced himself as a police officer from a nearby station. He explained that after everyone had left the restaurant, my mother-in-law had stayed behind, trying to continue eating. Shockingly, she attempted to charge the bill to me. However, the restaurant staff, already displeased with her earlier behavior, denied her request. They believed I had no intention of returning to settle the bill, especially after leaving upset. Finding herself in a bind, my mother-in-law was advised to pay by card, but she had neither a card nor enough cash to cover the expenses for everyone's meals. Desperate, she tried to reach out to other family members for help, but none responded to her calls. Frustrated and enraged, her anger escalated, and she began breaking expensive vases and flower pots inside the restaurant. The disruption prompted the staff to call the police. When the officers arrived, they managed to calm her somewhat, but she remained defiant, refusing to take responsibility for the chaos she had caused. With the restaurant yet to be compensated, the staff requested the police to escort her home. Feeling a sense of duty, despite having ignored the earlier calls, my husband and I reluctantly returned to the restaurant to address the situation. Upon arrival, we found the police still attempting to pacify my mother-in-law. The moment she saw me, she glared and shouted, "You're useless. This mess happened because you didn't pay the bill. Isn't it only natural to help your mother? Pay up now." Her nearly threatening tone, especially in front of law enforcement, took me aback. The officers had made it clear that if no one took responsibility, they would have to either escort her to a family member's home or arrest her for attempting to leave without paying the bill. Exasperated and determined to end the drama, I responded firmly, "Please take her away. Arrest her or do whatever you need to do. But make her take responsibility." My mother-in-law looked stunned by my assertiveness. How could you say something so heartless? I can't believe it. Just pay the bill. It's bad luck to have a family member arrested, she pleaded. But my resolve was unshaken. I don't care. I'm not family, and I don't want to be associated with someone who's acting irrationally and causing a disturbance, I replied. With that, I turned to leave the restaurant, determined to let the police handle the situation. All I wanted was to distance myself from the chaos and ensure my mother-in-law faced the consequences of her actions. Just as I was about to walk out, my husband, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. I understand what happened was awful for Samantha, but is it really serious enough to warrant an arrest? He asked, coming to his mother's defense. You're missing the point, I shot back. She's in trouble with the police because she tried to leave without paying and caused a scene. It has nothing to do with me. Or are you suggesting I should be responsible for paying for 7 people's meals when I didn't even eat? My husband fell silent, then walked past me towards the police and the restaurant staff. Anticipating his next move, I called out, if you're going to pay for her meal and compensate them, we're getting divorced. Think about that. He didn't respond to my ultimatum. Instead, he quietly took out his wallet. Feeling hurt and betrayed, I left the restaurant, walking back home alone. Once home, I began packing my essential belongings, my decision to leave solidifying with every item I placed in my bag. Just before midnight, my husband returned. Mom's not getting arrested, he sighed, clearly exhausted. She was in the wrong, but the restaurant said they'd forgive her if I compensated them and promised she wouldn't come back. I didn't have enough money, so I called my brothers to help. I'm so tired, he went on, recounting the night's events, his frustration growing as he noticed my silence. Finally, he saw the packed bags. What's with these bags? He asked, confusion evident on his face. I'm getting ready to leave, I replied, my voice steady. We're getting divorced. His face fell as the weight of my words hit him, and I knew the rift his actions had caused was too deep to repair. I told you that if you sided with her, we get divorced. You can't say you didn't hear me, I declared, my voice steady and resolute. My husband's face showed pure shock, his eyes wide with astonishment before his expression shifted, and he began raising his voice. What's happening? You've been acting so strange today. I understand that Mom did something terrible, but why does this have to lead to divorce? He exclaimed. I've told you countless times that I'm being mistreated, I countered, frustration seeping into my tone. Even with all the evidence and others backing me up, you still chose your almost arrested mother over me. Isn't it reasonable that I want to divorce someone who behaves like that? I've had enough. He continued to protest, but I barely listened. My mind was already focused on leaving the house and taking the necessary steps for a divorce. The very next morning, I went straight to get the divorce papers. When I handed them over to my husband, he made a dramatic show, lamenting how he didn't want a divorce. However, the moment I mentioned involving a lawyer, his reluctance disappeared, and he signed the papers. I sent them off immediately, marking the official end of our marriage. Finally, I felt a profound sense of freedom, reclaiming my independence. Soon after, my now ex-husband moved out and went to live with his parents. It turned out he had relied heavily on me for household chores, and without me, he struggled to manage on his own. The apartment quickly fell into disarray, and disliking the mess, he ended the lease and returned to his parents' home. A similar fate befell his eldest and third brothers. On the day my husband called them to help with the financial compensation at the restaurant, both encountered conflicts with their wives. Their wives had refused to pay for a debacle caused entirely by their mother-in-law. These tensions exposed deeper issues in their marriages, revealing a pattern of behavior far beyond my situation. However, both brothers chose to dip into their savings to help their mother without consulting their wives. This financial decision sparked heated disputes and strained their marriages, leading to serious talks of divorce. Ultimately, both brothers moved back to their parents' home, joining my ex-husband and mother-in-law. Like their mother, they refused to engage in any housework, preferring to rely on others. The entire family dynamic became the talk of the neighborhood, fueling endless gossip. Neighbors whispered about how the wives had allegedly abandoned their husbands, but in truth, they were simply standing up for themselves against a toxic family environment. In the end, my mother-in-law and her 3 sons, reluctant to grow up and take responsibility, found themselves all living together again, trapped by the very behaviors that had driven their families apart. The 3 brothers, in response, received staunch support from their mother, who blamed all the family strife on their wives. My ex-husband, hearing about this, nodded smugly, convinced that divorcing me had been the right decision. Despite the swirling rumors, my relationship with the neighbors remained strong. They knew all too well about my mother-in-law's difficult personality and kept a respectful distance from her, occasionally sharing quiet laughs about her antics. Over time, my mother-in-law developed a notorious reputation in the neighborhood as a parent who had failed to properly raise her sons. My ex-husbands were labeled as mama's boys, criticized for siding with their mother instead of supporting their wives. Despite their attempts to reach out to me, I took decisive steps to start anew. I changed all my contact details and moved to a new house, ensuring they couldn't find me, securing my peace and beginning a fresh chapter far from the turmoil of the past. Since cutting ties with my mother-in-law and her side of the family, my life has transformed remarkably for the better. The relief of no longer having to deal with the constant stress and drama she caused is immense. Even more, the opportunity to form new friendships has greatly enriched my life. During the turbulent time of my divorce, I found unexpected camaraderie with the ex-wives of my former husband's brothers. Our shared experiences with my mother-in-law brought us together, and we've since grown close. Now, we frequently meet up for meals and enjoy weekend shopping trips. Ironically, I find myself grateful to my ex-husband for one thing, introducing me to these incredible women who have become dear friends. In just 3 days, we're planning to explore a new cafe in town. It's refreshing to engage in activities that bring us joy, free from the toxic relationships of the past. This newfound freedom is incredibly liberating. I'm now living the life I've always wanted, surrounded by friends who uplift and support me. Reflecting on how different my life would have been without these friendships, I realize how much they've filled a void I hadn't even recognized. For that, I am profoundly grateful. I cherish these bonds deeply and hope they last a lifetime, as they have truly changed my perspective on what it means to have supportive, meaningful relationships.
It became apparent that Charles's employee, Junior, had been openly undermining his leadership, going so far as to dismiss Charles as a competent boss altogether. Charles overheard these disparaging remarks, which led to a tense confrontation between the two. In hindsight, Charles should have realized the importance of fostering a stronger relationship with his team. On the other hand, I received an offer to relocate to our company's overseas headquarters. Initially, I declined, weighed down by the ongoing issues and wanting to be supportive of Charles during his turbulent time. However, after much thought, I accepted the position and am now preparing for the move. My father, understandably concerned, has been adjusting to the idea, and we've started practicing video calls to stay connected once I leave. This new role has been a lifelong dream of mine, and I'm eager to pour my energy into this exciting opportunity. As for Charles, he rarely contributed to household chores, yet this never seemed to bother Angela. When they went out, Charles typically took the lead, allowing Angela to relax and enjoy herself without stress. Their relationship seemed balanced, or at least it appeared that way. Everything shifted when Angela's mother suddenly passed away. Angela was at work when her father called to inform her that her mother's condition had taken a sharp turn for the worse, and she had collapsed. Rushing to the hospital, Angela barely had time to say her goodbyes. She decided to stay with her father to help manage the funeral arrangements. When she informed Charles, he claimed he couldn't leave work on such short notice. As a result, he missed the wake and only arrived in time for the funeral. Unprepared for the occasion, Charles hadn't even dressed appropriately, and I found myself in a frantic scramble to find something suitable for him to wear. Despite my efforts, he made no effort to hide his irritation, blaming me for not having prepared his clothes in advance. The heavy emotions surrounding the funeral, along with the responsibilities that came with it, made Charles's complaints even harder to bear. I eventually decided to ignore them, hoping to avoid a confrontation, but this only seemed to worsen his mood. Since that day, our marriage has become increasingly strained, with arguments becoming more frequent. Disagreements aren't uncommon after 4 years of marriage, but Charles's behavior has grown more combative. He constantly insists on making decisions and dictating what I should do. and it's been draining. I've tried to push back a few times, but his unfamiliarity with the simplest things in our home has turned minor tasks into drawn-out frustrations, accompanied by his never-ending grumbling. As time went on, I realized it was often easier to handle things on my own. Even though Charles continues to make demands, I haven't always followed his instructions, opting instead to take care of tasks independently to keep my life running smoothly. Recently, I brought up the upcoming gathering to mark the first anniversary of my mother's passing. When I reminded Charles, his response was indifferent at best. He complained about an important meeting scheduled on the same day, questioning how he could possibly attend the memorial. His excuse was that he couldn't delegate his work, especially since his recent promotion, which he never missed a chance to flaunt to his junior staff. I was barely able to contain my frustration as I tried to convey how important the memorial was to me. It was painfully clear that he prioritized his new title and responsibilities, often leaving me to manage everything on my own. No matter how much I urged him to focus on our family's needs, his work always seemed to come first. Later that evening, when I finally arrived home from work, I found Charles sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand. "Sorry, I'm late. Had to stay for overtime," I explained, already sensing his annoyance that dinner had been delayed. His response was sharp. "I've been waiting here for an hour." While it had only been an hour, and knowing that cooking wasn't his strong suit, it baffled me that he hadn't thought to get something to eat in the meantime. I had told him when I'd be home. After all, trying to keep my irritation in check, I handed him a takeout box and said, "I thought cooking would take too long tonight, so I grabbed this on the way home." Charles's reaction was swift and cutting, slamming his beer glass onto the table. "Takeout again? You're really slacking off lately, aren't you?" His words stung, especially considering it had been nearly 3 weeks since we last ordered takeout. Yes, I had been busy and couldn't cook every night, but I always ensured we had balanced meals and didn't rely on processed food. His uncalled-for critique left me debating whether I should even respond. Sensing my silence as an admission of guilt, Charles pressed on, adding insult to injury. "Can't argue when it's true. Huh? You should start doing your chores properly. You've been coming home late, claiming overtime. Maybe you're just out cheating." His accusation ignited the resentment simmering inside me. "If you know I'm working late, the least you could do is make dinner," I shot back. "You don't even have to cook. Picking up takeout isn't that hard. I always tell you when I'll be home, and despite my workload, I manage all the household chores. There's no need for that attitude." His response was a sharp glare, followed by a low blow. "You're 4 years older. Remember? I could have married a younger woman, but I chose you." He spoke as though I should be grateful, like his choice of me was a favor I didn't deserve. "You should be thankful and listen to me. No one else would want you." His words were meant to belittle me, but instead, they revealed just how broken our communication and respect for each other had become. "So, if I left, you'd be in trouble, right?" My anger boiled over. "If you wanted a younger woman, you should have married one before we got together. I asked you if you were fine with my age, and you said yes. That's why we're married. But trust me, I can manage just fine without you." Charles responded with a mocking laugh. "Fine, then let's get a divorce," he said, grabbing his beer and the takeout before storming off to his room. We had fought plenty of times before, but this argument felt different, like we had crossed a line. I was tired of his constant disrespect. I sat down with my takeout, trying to calm myself, hoping maybe he was just hungry and irritable. But as I ate, the weight of our conversation hung heavily on me, especially with my mom's death anniversary just around the corner. After some time, I called out to him from outside his door. "We need to leave by 7 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 6 o'clock. There was no response, though I was sure he was awake. I went to bed, feeling a mix of exhaustion and unease. The next morning, I woke up early to find that Charles was already gone. The bags I had packed for us were still in the room. He hadn't left for the gathering without me. So, where had he gone? I tried calling his phone, but there was no answer. He ignored my texts too. Left with no choice, I left him a voicemail and started getting ready on my own. As I waited for the train at the station, Charles finally picked up. "I have a meeting. Can't leave it to my juniors," he said curtly before hanging up. I stood there, staring at my phone, feeling a mix of anger and resignation. I stood there, stunned and bewildered, as the train arrived. With no time to dwell on it, I boarded, struggling with the luggage meant for both of us. When I finally reached my father's house, his anxious eyes met mine as he asked, "Where's Charles?" Seeing the lingering sadness in his eyes since my mother's passing, I didn't want to add to his worries. Forcing a smile, I took a deep breath and replied, "Sorry. He got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come." Charles's recent promotion made for a convenient excuse, and I reassured my father that his absence was work-related and important. My father nodded understandingly. "I know he's working hard. It's a shame not to see him, but your mother would have understood. Let him know he's always welcome here," he said softly. There was a hint of sadness in his words, but I kept my smile intact throughout the day, refusing to show how much it hurt. The day passed without a word from Charles, and as night settled in, I chose not to reach out either. I decided to stay the night at my father's house and return home the next day. As planned, though it felt almost childish, the thought of making Charles his favorite meal, hamburgers, crossed my mind for when I got home. The following day, I left my father's house and returned home around noon. Before heading out to the grocery store, I wanted to drop off my bags. As I walked into the living room, I immediately noticed Charles's dirty laundry scattered across the floor, a sight I was all too familiar with. With a sigh, I thought, he still hasn't learned how to use the washing machine. I tossed his clothes in with mine, and after a brief moment, headed back to the living room. That's when something caught my eye. Sitting on the table, as if left deliberately in plain view, were divorce papers, already signed by Charles. My heart sank. Was this really how he wanted to communicate that he was serious about ending our marriage? Staring at the papers in disbelief, a storm of emotions surged through me. Grabbing my phone, I hesitated for a second before calling him, unsure if he'd even pick up during his lunch break. To my surprise, he answered almost immediately. "What's the meaning of these divorce papers?" I demanded, my voice a blend of confusion and anger. Charles responded with a cold, mocking laugh. "What's there to question? It's exactly what it looks like. I don't want an older wife who won't do her chores. That's why I want a divorce. If we split, I can find a younger wife. A wife's like a status symbol, right? I can't exactly boast about you." His words hit me like a punch, reducing our years together to nothing more than a transaction, turning what I had believed to be a partnership into something shallow and superficial. Charles continued, his tone indifferent. "It's tough when my team asks about you. It's awkward avoiding the topic." I was speechless. His blunt criticism was stunning, and I found myself unable to respond. "If you don't want a divorce, then start doing your chores properly," he continued, as if this was a reasonable request. "I'll be home as usual tonight, so don't forget to grab some beer. If you disagree, take the divorce papers to court. It's up to you." With that, he hung up, leaving me reeling, my mind spinning with shock and disbelief. Charles probably assumed I'd give in to his demands, thinking that I did the housework because I was afraid of losing him or worried about appearing incompetent. Perhaps he saw himself as the dominant figure in our marriage. Some might think being married to a younger man sounds exciting, but in reality, it was far from glamorous. I had often played up his youth, but if I was honest, Charles was painfully average in looks, personality, And income. There was nothing exceptional about him. Describing him as younger had merely been convenient. When we first got married, the 4-year age gap had seemed more noticeable, but now, in our 30s, it felt trivial. It was exhausting to constantly be labeled the older wife when we were essentially the same age. Fed up with his arrogance and the hollow foundation of our marriage, I grabbed my bag and headed straight to the family court. Submitting those divorce papers felt like lifting a weight off my chest. As I walked out of the courthouse, a sense of relief washed over me. I realized then that I didn't need Charles to feel complete. With the promise of newfound freedom, I felt lighter, as though I had finally stepped out from under a cloud that had long been looming over me. This was the end of our marriage, but the beginning of a life where I could truly live on my own terms. Seizing the opportunity, I decided to take a few days off from work. Fortunately, my boss understood and granted me a week's leave, as work had slowed down. Now that I was officially divorced, it was time to get my life in order. With only a few possessions, the cleaning and packing were straightforward. I stored the larger items in a storage unit, packed the essentials and clothes into my car, and on a whim, decided to visit a hot spring resort. During the off-season, I easily found a budget-friendly hotel and set off, thrilled to start this new chapter of my life. I was savoring the peaceful atmosphere of the hot springs and enjoying the relaxation of my hotel room when my phone rang abruptly. "Angela, didn't I ask you to get beer? Where are you?" It was Charles, sounding puzzled and slightly irritated. It was around the time he usually returned home from work. I couldn't help but chuckle as I answered, "I'm at a hot spring resort." "A hot spring resort? Why? What's going on?" Charles's voice carried a mix of confusion and agitation. "Didn't you say I should file for divorce if I disagreed with you?" I reminded him, picturing his stunned expression, which made me laugh even more. "Wait, did you actually file them?" His tone shifted from bewildered to frustrated. "Yes, I did. You suggested it, Charles. Have you forgotten what you said?" I replied, still amused by his reaction. Charles's voice, now tinged with anxiety, showed his disbelief. "Wait, are you joking? When you say hot spring resort, do you mean some nearby spa? If so, I'll get dinner. Come home soon." I couldn't help but laugh at his sudden shift to a seemingly considerate tone, as if he was trying to play the caring husband. "It took me about an hour and a half to drive here. There's even an outdoor natural hot spring. It's incredibly relaxing. I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. Since you're getting dinner, I've already packed my things, so you won't have to worry about me coming back. Take care of yourself." Charles pleaded for me to return, but I had no intention of going back. "You're the one who initiated the divorce. Have you forgotten? It was clear you were using the threat of divorce to control me," I told him firmly. "I can manage without you now that you've divorced your older wife. Go ahead and find a younger one if you can. Whether you succeed or not is no longer my concern," I said firmly. Charles fell silent, clearly taken aback by my determination. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you should consider moving out of that apartment." "Why should I?" I responded calmly, though I had already considered this myself. "Think about your income. You'll end up broke if you stay there. You can't clean, do laundry, or cook. You'll need housekeeping and dining out, which costs money. It would be a problem if most of your salary goes towards rent," he reasoned. I couldn't help but smile slightly. "You thought you were the provider, but my salary is nearly double yours. You never really provided for me, if anything. It was the other way around," I said, cutting to the core of the issue. "Also, you were overly confident because of one junior. But did you know I manage multiple juniors and even more beneath them? I usually keep work to myself because you get moody, but I outrank you in both position and salary. You'd think you would have noticed after living together." It seemed like Charles was just now realizing this, possibly because he had kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that his delusion was shattered, he must have felt defeated. I had struck a blow to his pride, a kind of retribution for all these years. The reason I had handled household chores without complaint, despite his domineering attitude, was partly because he was younger and I had given him some leeway, and partly because it was too much trouble to ask him for anything. It's not like I needed you to stay with me. I was just managing your needs along with my own. So when you said, do the chores, or we divorce, of course, I chose divorce. We're strangers now. Goodbye, I said firmly before ending the call. Feeling a sense of liberation, I enjoyed a delicious meal at the hotel afterward. Charles, evidently still clinging to the idea of reconciliation, attempted to reach out again, but I was already relishing the newfound freedom and independence in my life. When he called once more, I greeted him with a knowing smile. Remember, I'm older than you. I'm sure you wouldn't want me back. It seemed that Charles's search for companionship with younger women had not been successful. Eventually, he realized his situation was not favorable and decided to move out of the apartment. To handle the division of assets, I hired a lawyer to ensure I received more than just an equitable split. I sought additional compensation to reflect the years I had managed most of the household chores. Charles, always looking to cut costs, opted against hiring legal representation, giving me a considerable advantage. With the help of my lawyer, we secured a settlement that was highly favorable to me. I was satisfied with the outcome and relieved to have resolved the matter. Meanwhile, Charles's troubles at work were only beginning. His junior team member had been openly critical of his leadership, undermining his authority by declaring he wasn't a proper boss. Charles discovered these complaints, leading to a heated argument, another clear sign of the importance of nurturing and supporting your team, something Charles had evidently neglected. In terms of my career, I had been offered a highly sought-after position at our company's overseas headquarters. Initially, I hesitated to accept due to the personal upheavals and out of consideration for Charles. However, with my personal situation evolving, I decided to embrace the opportunity wholeheartedly. I am now actively preparing for this exciting transition, though it has caused some concern for my father. We've adapted by practicing video calls to stay connected once I'm abroad. I feel content and excited about the future, ready to fully commit to this new chapter of my life. It's time to pursue the career I've always dreamed of, confident that I've made the right decisions for my future.
I've been happily married for 5 years, living with my thoughtful husband. We shared a close bond, eagerly anticipating the arrival of children, though we haven't had any yet. However, life took an unexpected turn following a recent incident, and I feel compelled to share this remarkable story. My husband is universally regarded as kind, a sentiment echoed by both my parents who hold him in high esteem. My sister, a dedicated career woman, has always focused primarily on her work, but she and my husband got along well despite her typically reserved demeanor. Recently, his work responsibilities intensified dramatically. He began returning home late and even started working on his scheduled days off. As a new team leader, he was often glued to his cell phone, coordinating with his team at all hours. While some might have found his sudden change in routine suspicious, I saw it as a commitment to his job, worrying instead about the toll it was taking on his health. Amid these changes, my sister decided to relocate for a new job opportunity that required her to furnish her new apartment. I planned to drive her to the furniture store on Saturday to help her out, but an unexpected call from my boss required my immediate presence at work, leaving me in a bind. Thankfully, that Saturday was one of my husband's rare days off. Despite his recent busyness, he graciously offered to help when he saw my predicament. It was slightly awkward for him to spend the day alone with my sister, but he agreed and even asked to borrow my car since his was in the shop. Grateful for his kindness, I went to handle the emergency at work. This was the first time my husband and sister had spent time together without me, and as I dealt with my responsibilities, I couldn't help but wonder how they were managing on their own. I hoped they were making the most of their unexpected day together and finding everything my sister needed for her new place. After resolving the issues at work, it was already dark by the time I checked my phone, planning to meet my husband and sister for dinner. However, I was caught off guard by a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end asked if I was a family member of David. Confused, I confirmed my identity as his wife. That's when the police officer delivered the shocking news. My husband had been in a car accident, and both he and his passenger, my sister, were unconscious. In a blur, I rushed to the hospital. Upon arriving at the emergency department, I gave my name and was quickly escorted to the intensive care unit. Through the glass, I could see my husband surrounded by machines, his body covered in bandages. My heart sank as I stood there, anxious about what the future held for him. Later that night, my mother arrived from far away to support us through this ordeal. As we waited anxiously, a police officer provided more details about the accident. He explained that David had been driving on a well-lit road when another car, which had run a red light, struck his vehicle. The driver of that car was also seriously injured and receiving treatment at the same hospital. However, this driver claimed that David's car had been behaving erratically before the crash, leading the police to investigate whether he might have fallen asleep at the wheel. After several tense days, both my husband and sister regained consciousness, and the doctors began conducting several tests. When my mother and I were called in for the results, the doctors delivered some difficult news. While they assured us that David and my sister would survive, they warned us that both might face lasting disabilities. Despite this grim prognosis, my mother and I felt relieved that they were alive. We clung to the hope that with rehabilitation, they could recover to some degree. Choosing to focus on the positive, we decided not to share the potential long-term impacts of their injuries with them. Instead, we surrounded them with encouragement and care, grateful for their survival. My mother took on the role of caring for my sister while I dedicated myself to looking after my husband. In the early days after the accident, he was visibly shaken, struggling both emotionally and physically. He was deeply troubled, not just by his own condition but also by the impact the accident had on all of us. As time passed, the man who had always been gentle and kind began to change. Frustration took hold, particularly regarding his impaired mobility and the ongoing medical treatments he faced. The reality of having to leave his job weighed heavily on his mind, and despite my efforts to support him, his irritability grew. I continued to visit him regularly at the hospital, determined to be there for him. During one of these visits, a police detective approached me with new information about the accident. He explained that there had been a leak in the brake oil of my car, likely contributing to the vehicle's erratic behavior before the crash. This revelation suggested that an accident might have been inevitable, either for me or someone else. Additionally, I learned that the woman who had crashed into us was also suffering. Her mother approached me to apologize, marking our first encounter since the incident. As days turned into weeks, my husband's frustration escalated. He grew increasingly resentful of my mobility and independence, angered by the contrast between our situations. His frustration often manifested in demanding behavior and outbursts of anger when I couldn't meet his needs as quickly or fully as he wanted. Objects were thrown, and harsh words exchanged over minor issues, such as my decision to step out to buy lunch. The demands and complaints grew more frequent and intense, adding to the strain of our situation. I empathized deeply with my husband's pain and frustration, but the reality of our situation required me to balance my time between supporting him and fulfilling my responsibilities. I needed to work to support us financially, stay updated on the police investigation, and coordinate with the hospital regarding his care. Despite the challenges and his occasional outbursts, I remained committed to helping him through his recovery, hoping that with time, patience, and care, we could navigate this difficult period together. However, I barely had a moment to myself anymore. My husband's demeanor had become increasingly difficult to manage, leaving me feeling cornered by the escalating tensions. Similarly, my sister was grappling with her own frustrations, and our mother appeared visibly worn out from the strain. I learned that my sister was placing even heavier demands on our mother, who was already stretched thin from not working and caring for both of us. Whenever I couldn't visit the hospital, both my husband and sister became more despondent. Hearing from doctors that they might remain paralyzed despite ongoing rehabilitation efforts added to the stress. The issue of my car's brake oil leak soon came to a head. My sister confronted me, her tone accusatory. I heard your car was leaking oil. You were supposed to maintain it. Because of your negligence, I can't work or return to normal. Mom's stressed and your husband is suffering. You're going to have to take care of us for the rest of your life. Her harsh words took me by surprise, prompting me to call our mother, who confessed that my sister had been in a distressed mental state for quite some time. Despite the tension, my concern for my husband drove me to the hospital, only to find that he was not in his room. I eventually found my husband in the common room, quietly sitting with my sister. The visiting hours were about to end, leaving them alone in the otherwise empty space. It was there that my husband coldly remarked, "If you had just taken the car in for inspection, maybe none of this would have happened." His glare was piercing as he added, "Yeah, and now you're the reason your sister and I are in this mess. The insurance will cover some of it, but you'll be taking care of us for the rest of your lives. Remember that." His words struck me like a punch, igniting a surge of emotions within me. Surprised and hurt, I responded, "Since when have you become so close to my sister?" "What do you mean by that?" He shot back, "You don't come around often, and your mom even texted your sister to visit since we're both stuck here and can't walk. What's wrong with talking to your husband?" The situation felt overwhelming, and it was clear that the stress and fear of our new reality were profoundly affecting everyone's emotions and actions. Feeling increasingly isolated, I sensed my husband and sister were aligning against me. With a hint of sarcasm, I tried to lighten the mood. "Right, you two haven't spent much time together before the accident, have you?" Ignoring my tone, my husband replied, "What are you talking about? We're discussing you taking care of us. And you know that." My sister avoided my gaze but nodded in agreement, as if to confirm their expectation of my lifelong support. I hadn't anticipated a straightforward answer from either of them, but I pressed on, hoping to make them see my perspective. Switching topics, I casually mentioned, "I wonder how the person who hit your car is doing now." "How should I know?" My sister retorted defensively. "She hit us when the light was red. It's just unbelievable." "That's right. You can't imagine how terrifying it was," my husband chimed in. "We need to make sure we get compensation from her. I was so close to getting a promotion too." As their complaints continued, I realized it was time to clarify some facts. "There's something you both need to know. First off, I had my car inspected just before the accident," I said. "Oh, did you? Then the dealer should be sued. There's no way they didn't know the brake fluid was leaking." My sister quickly interjected. "That's right," I agreed. "After the accident, the police contacted me to examine the car and determine the cause. They wanted to check my drive recorder, but that old recorder doesn't capture sound and doesn't start recording right after an accident, so it's not very useful." My husband dismissed my explanation. "That's where you're wrong," I corrected him gently. "You didn't know that I replaced the old drive recorder with a new one, did you?" My sister looked up in surprise. "What?" "I also installed an additional camera inside the car," I continued. Her face grew increasingly pale as I spoke. "The new drive recorders can start recording with even the slightest shake of the car. The police have already contacted me about the data they've obtained." My husband's expression shifted to confusion, while my sister appeared so pale that she looked ready to collapse. Facing them directly, I confronted her. "You were up to something, weren't you? What exactly did you do to the car? Why are you addressing my sister like that?" My husband panicked, his voice shaky as he grappled with the implications of my words. "You talked to her as if she were your girlfriend." I reminded him. "I told you that a slight vibration would activate the recording, and it captured many intimate moments between you two." My words left him speechless, and the color drained from his face as I revealed how the police had inquired about the woman in the car with him. It was painfully clear now. His affair with my sister had been exposed. "You've been deceiving me all this time." I confronted them, the revelation hitting hard. My husband, cornered and desperate, began to deflect blame onto my sister. "Linda isn't the only one at fault here," he stammered. Just then, the mother of the woman who crashed into my car entered the room. I had invited her, hoping for some resolution or understanding. "Don't you have anything to say to her?" I challenged my sister, who recoiled at the sight of the distraught woman. "Wow, who's this?" my sister exclaimed, taken aback. "She's the mother of the woman who crashed into you," I explained, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil swirling inside me. My husband fell silent, finally realizing who she was as I continued. "And she's also the mother of Marilyn, the woman who was your victim." At the mention of the name Marilyn, both my husband and sister went pale, panic washing over their faces. What is this? Do you know the woman who was driving the car? My sister demanded, her voice trembling with shock and confusion. My husband, at a loss for words, looked utterly defeated. That's when I decided to lay everything bare. She was having an affair with David. He promised her a divorce but never followed through. When Marilyn falsely claimed she was pregnant to manipulate him, David told her to get an abortion and cut off contact. Devastated and seeking revenge, Marilyn targeted me, aiming to hurt me through you. I connected the dots of this malicious cycle spurred by deceit and betrayal. So you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, I concluded, the weight of the situation settling over us. I can't believe something like this has upended our lives, my sister murmured, the magnitude of the betrayal dawning on her. I looked at them, my voice quiet but firm. No matter how much you cry or scream now, it changes nothing. This tragedy wasn't the result of an innocent bystander's actions. It was woven through a web of lies and vengeance that you both were part of. The room fell silent, the harsh truth echoing among us as we faced the painful consequences of their actions. Pouring all my emotions into my words, I made sure they understood the gravity of what had happened. You were carrying on an affair behind my back, and Linda, you tampered with the brake fluid of my car, intending to hurt me. Yet ironically, you ended up in the accident yourself. I am the true victim in this mess, I explained, bitterness clear in my voice as I revealed the depth of my disillusionment. I had contemplated not pursuing a divorce if you'd shown even a hint of remorse during your hospital stay and honestly explained everything. However, you never once expressed any regret. Instead, you treated me with contempt. Pausing to let that sink in, I reminded them, do you remember how we jokingly filled out those divorce papers right after we got married? I never thought I'd actually use them, but today I filed them. So, you're no longer married. This is goodbye. With that, I left the dark, quiet hospital, feeling a profound sense of liberation, expressing all the pent-up resentment had freed me in a way I anticipated. Yet the aftermath of this revelation was not without its consequences. My mother was deeply shocked by the entire ordeal. The betrayal by my sister pained her, and the realization that she would have to care for her physically disabled daughter alone was overwhelming. While I had severed my ties with David and Linda, I couldn't bear to leave my mother to handle everything on her own. To help alleviate some of the burden, I approached the woman responsible for the accident, facilitating the necessary apologies and discussions about compensation, ensuring my sister, who was inadvertently involved, would be taken care of financially. This was the least I could do to prevent my mother from being overly burdened. 3 years have passed since that tumultuous time. My ex-husband and I are now divorced, and I've moved on. But the scars from those revelations and the weight of my decisions linger, a constant reminder of the complexities of relationships and the unexpected turns life can take. Now, I'm living on my own. During my marriage, David and I were perceived as a close couple, so our divorce shocked my coworkers. Afterward, I noticed an increase in attention from male colleagues, which I attributed to the notion that divorced women might appear more approachable or intriguing to some men. Despite this newfound attention, the lingering image of my ex-husband made dating unappealing to me. Instead of pursuing romantic relationships, I channeled my energies into advancing my career. I diligently studied for a certification exam and enrolled in an online business school that I could attend after work. I had never envisioned myself pursuing such a path. I never envied my sister, the career woman, and never thought I'd aspire to be one. Yet there I was, naturally gravitating toward this new goal. Life certainly has its twists. Since then, my ex-husband has moved back in with his parents, but it seems he has become a burden to them. His relatives blame him for his poor behavior and the way he treated me, and I've heard he's not doing well mentally. He's been acting out violently, causing trouble for those around him. My sister also returned to her parents' home, but her mental state has deteriorated further, and she continues to exhibit selfish behaviors. My mother, worn out from the ordeal, used my sister's savings and the accident compensation to place her in a care home. She consulted me before making this decision, and seeing no reason to object, I told her to do whatever she felt was necessary. Navigating these changes, I learned to adapt and focus on my personal growth, realizing that sometimes the most challenging situations lead to unexpected paths and new beginnings. At one point, I feared I would end up caring for both of them for the rest of my life, a prospect that felt like servitude. However, Everything changed when I passed the certification exam I had been working toward. This achievement led to a transfer to a department where I could effectively utilize my new skills. During this period of professional growth, I grew close to the instructor of the online business school I attended. Soon, we began to plan a future together. Unlike my past relationship, he isn't just kind to everyone, he shows a special kindness toward me. For instance, if I'm working late, he makes it a point to come home early and prepare dinner for us. This thoughtful gesture means the world to me, and I've come to cherish these moments of simple happiness. Now, as I head home after a long day, I often find myself smiling at the thought of seeing him. I look up at the stars, grateful for the turn my life has taken, and feel eager to return to the warm home we've built together. I was recently taken aback to discover that a significant fire had occurred at Ever Trust Company, where my husband Richard works. It felt as though I had been hit over the head with a heavy weight, my heart racing with concern. I quickly dialed Richard's number, fervently hoping he was unharmed. When the phone rang and his voice finally came through, a wave of relief washed over me. "Where are you? Are you safe?" I asked, my voice rising in volume from anxiety and relief. To my surprise, Richard responded with irritation, his tone sharp. "What's the matter with you? You're so loud. I'm at work. Don't call me while I'm working." He abruptly hung up, leaving me confused and unsettled. While he didn't appear to be directly involved in the fire, his dismissive reaction was troubling. "My name is Sarah, and I'm 35 years old. Nursing is a significant part of my life. I married Richard 4 years ago, just as I was nearing the end of my 20s. We met through a mutual friend and quickly connected, leading to what I thought was a blissful marriage. We've been living in company housing provided by his employer. Despite not having children yet, I remain hopeful about building a happy family with Richard. He can be self-centered at times, but he's generally a kind and loving man who makes me feel secure. Recently, however, he seems overly preoccupied with work, often bringing tasks home even on his days off, which leaves him visibly exhausted. Richard's detachment has seeped into our evenings. After dinner, he often slumps on the sofa, ostensibly watching TV, but he's mostly fixated on his phone, using the television as mere background noise. Whenever I try to engage him in conversation, his responses are brief, typically just a "yeah" or an "oh," which makes me question whether I've done something to upset him. This recent shift in his behavior is puzzling and concerning. Choosing to believe that Richard is simply overwhelmed by his demanding job, I decided to help ease his burden. I committed to making sure he had a warm lunch and a hearty dinner waiting for him every day, preparing nutritious meals to support him through his long days. Just as I was settling into this routine, an unexpected change threw everything into disarray. A colleague called the day before, asking if I could swap my night shift for a day shift. This sudden change meant I would be home in the evening, and I planned to inform Richard about it amid the chaos of my new schedule. I managed to email Richard about the shift change on the day itself, letting him know not to worry about dinner since I would prepare it once I got home. Strangely, I didn't receive a response. I figured he was swamped with work, so I focused on my duties. Even after my shift ended, there was still no word from him. This was unusual. Richard typically replied promptly to my messages during his breaks, often using emojis to keep the tone light. But this time, he had only read my message and didn't respond. I began to wonder if he was buried under work or if this silence signaled something more concerning, a shift that can sometimes happen after years of marriage. Feeling a bit down, I stopped at the supermarket on my way home. Despite the cold weather, I was determined to make a warm one-pot meal for us. I picked up all the necessary ingredients, ready to start cooking as soon as Richard walked through the door. However, he didn't come home at his usual time of 6:00 p.m. The hours dragged on, and by the time he finally arrived at 9:00 p.m., I felt a mix of relief and worry. As he entered, I greeted him, trying to keep the mood light. "Welcome back. You're home late. Did you have to work overtime?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern, hoping for a simple explanation. "Yeah, but did you really have to switch to day shift so suddenly?" Richard replied as he walked into the kitchen. I nodded, sensing the tension. "Yes, a coworker had an emergency and I was late in telling you about the change," I explained. "I see. I guess you couldn't help it," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But it's a bit annoying that you only informed me today. I might have made plans to go out for a drink or something." "You're right. I'm sorry," I said, feeling the weight of his disappointment. I replied as I turned on the stove to heat the pot. Oh, you haven't eaten yet. Richard noticed the setup. No, I thought I'd wait for you, I said, hoping he'd appreciate the gesture. Well, thanks, but next time you don't have to wait for me, he said. His words stung a little. I had hoped for a cozy evening together. I sighed quietly as I waited for the pot to boil. Once it started to simmer, I served up Richard's portion, followed by mine. I was famished after waiting all evening, and the hot pot was delicious. I began to savor each bite, but then I noticed that Richard wasn't eating much. What's wrong? You don't seem to be eating, I remarked. Oh, yes, he muttered, looking distracted. Then he admitted, I worked late, and a junior colleague bought me a rice bowl at work, so I'm not hungry. But you should have told me that earlier, I replied, feeling a mix of disappointment and frustration. You could have sent a quick message before I started cooking. I think Richard sensed my irritation because he quickly suggested, okay, then put my portion in the fridge. I'll eat it tomorrow morning. He tried to lighten the mood, but the atmosphere was already strained. After a few minutes of silence, Richard got up from the couch and suddenly announced, I'm going for a walk. His abrupt decision to leave the house after our interaction felt unusual, leaving me puzzled about what was going on with him lately. When I expressed my concern about his sudden urge to walk, Richard explained, I haven't been getting enough exercise lately, and with all the late work hours, I just need a change of pace. He began preparing to head out, leaving me feeling hollow as I sat alone at the dining table with the hot pot in front of me. Eventually, I decided to put my portion in the fridge, feeling slightly overstuffed. I realized that Richard and I hadn't spent much quality time together lately, so I suggested joining him for a walk, hoping it might provide an opportunity for us to reconnect. However, Richard declined my offer. It's not good to move around right after eating. Besides, I need to take a long walk alone tonight, he said before leaving the house by himself. His behavior struck me as odd, and driven by a nagging instinct, I discreetly followed him from a distance. Despite the cool evening air, Richard walked with an unusual spring in his step. He eventually stopped near a park quite a distance from our home, where he seemed to be waiting for someone, frequently checking his phone. A few minutes later, a car pulled up, and Richard strolled over, chatting casually with the driver. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved closer to get a better look through the car window. Inside sat a woman with long curly hair and shiny lipstick, laughing joyfully as Richard climbed into the passenger seat. The sight felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't shake the thought that he might be having an affair. Just as I was processing the scene, the car drove off with them, leaving me standing there, stunned and struggling to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Not long after, Richard texted me, claiming he had unexpectedly run into an acquaintance and would be home late. His explanation felt far too convenient, and deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The trust I had in him began to waver. My trust in him was shaken as I struggled to comprehend the reality of the situation. He had claimed he wasn't hungry because he had already eaten, yet it was past 3:00 a.m. when my husband finally came home. He stumbled in, seemingly tipsy, and headed straight to the kitchen for a glass of water, completely unaware that I was awake. Since that night, he had often stayed late at work, especially when I was on the day shift. Synchronizing our days off had always been a challenge, but now it felt nearly impossible. Recently, he was not only working late but also putting in hours on what were supposed to be his days off. I couldn't shake the suspicion that he might be meeting the woman I had seen with him that night. Driven by doubt, I began searching for detective agencies online. After some digging, I submitted an investigation request to the most reputable one I could find. I felt guilty for going behind his back, but I reasoned that if the investigation cleared him, I could fully trust him again. Waiting for the results was excruciating. My husband remained as reserved as ever, and every time I looked at him, the image of that woman haunted me. I was desperate for clarity. Then an unexpected event occurred. It was a busy Saturday at the hospital where I worked, and my husband was supposedly working on his day off. As I focused on my tasks, trying to push aside my personal issues, the distant sound of fire truck sirens caught my attention. The noise grew louder and more urgent, and soon it wasn't just one fire truck, but several speeding by. A sense of unease crept over me, turning into worry as two of my colleagues returned to the ward with grave expressions. They were discussing an emergency, a large fire nearby. You mean the fire? I asked, trying to catch up with their conversation. Yes, that's right, they confirmed. There's a major fire at Trust Company. The shock hit me like a physical blow. Trust Company was where my husband worked. An overwhelming sense of distress washed over me as I considered the danger he might be in. Learning that the fire was at Trust filled me with immediate dread. I quickly explained the situation to my colleagues and rushed to call Richard, hoping against hope that he was safe. Despite the recent tension between us, I always made sure to see him off each morning, and now I dialed his number with a heavy heart, praying fervently that he hadn't been caught in the blaze. The phone rang, and when Richard's voice finally came through, it momentarily lifted my spirits. "Hello, Richard. Are you safe?" I asked, my voice louder than intended with relief. Instead of the reassurance I craved, his response was curt and irritated. "What's the matter with you? You're talking so loud. I'm at work. Don't call me while I'm working." Then the call abruptly ended. Confusion and anger surged within me. There was a massive fire with trucks dispatched to the scene. It was impossible for him to be working normally under those circumstances. His cold demeanor and strange response made me question whether he had even gone to work at all or if something else was happening. As my worry for his safety morphed into suspicion about his fidelity, I couldn't shake the thought of all those mornings I had seen him off. Was he using that time to meet someone else? By the time I reached home, my mind was made up. I needed to leave and start anew. As I began packing my belongings, I felt a mix of determination and sadness. I checked the mailbox and found that the results from the detective agency had arrived. It felt timely to take these with me as I left a house that no longer felt like home. My parents came over to help me pack, and I arranged for a moving contractor to expedite the process. As I worked amid the boxes, it struck me that Richard was probably unaware I knew the truth about his affairs, likely spending time with his lover at that very moment. I packed up my furniture and the appliances that had been with me since my Sable days. The room quickly emptied, becoming the hollow shell of the home it once was. Standing there, looking around at the nearly bare space, I realized how much I had changed and how necessary it was for me to move on from this chapter of my life. I felt completely detached from the life I once led in that house. With resolve, I moved my belongings to my parents' home and began searching for a new place to live on my own. The next day, Richard finally reached out, his voice laced with confusion and annoyance. "Hey, what's going on? Most of your stuff is gone." "I've moved out," I replied calmly. "What the hell were you thinking? When are you coming back? What about my food? What about the house chores?" His questions revealed everything. He was solely focused on how my departure affected him. Hearing his words stunned me, but I wasn't entirely surprised. "Is that all you think about when it comes to me?" I asked, disappointment heavy in my voice. Our conversation brought back memories of the fire at his company, a day he claimed to be tied up at the office, yet he seemed far too carefree given the circumstances. "Why don't you find another woman to handle all that?" I challenged, struggling to keep my composure. "What are you talking about?" he replied, genuinely confused. "You were with a woman named Kelly today, weren't you?" "Huh. What are you talking about? I was working at the office." "Oh, at the office? How long did you work today?" My suspicion intensified as the day grew busier, even though I was supposed to be off. I ended up working late into the evening, which made Richard's bewilderment over my move seem all the more suspicious. "That's why I was so surprised that you moved out," he said, trying to sound genuinely confused. "Stop lying already," I shot back sharply. "You lied about going to work, didn't you?" "I wasn't lying. I was working. What's going on?" His voice wavered between frustration and confusion. "How could you work late when there was a fire at your office during the day? When I called you, several fire trucks were dispatched to your company. They were there to extinguish the flames. That's why I called. I wanted to know if you were okay. You told me not to call you while you were at work, acting as if there was no fire." His silence spoke volumes, confirming my deepest doubts. The reality of the situation settled in, exposing the fissures in our relationship and making the distance between us feel more pronounced than ever. Armed with irrefutable evidence from the detective agency, I knew I had the upper hand. "There's no way you can escape this," I stated firmly. "From now on, all communication will go through my lawyer." As expected, he pleaded for forgiveness, repeatedly apologizing for his betrayal. But my feelings for him had faded long ago. "I'm sorry, but there's no fixing this. I'm hanging up now," I said, cutting off any further attempts at reconciliation. I promptly met with my lawyer to demand a divorce and alimony. With solid evidence in hand, the proceedings moved swiftly, and the divorce was finalized. Richard, along with his accomplice from work, a junior colleague, was ordered to pay a significant amount in alimony. Their affair not only had personal repercussions but professional ones as well. Once the news spread throughout the company, especially under the dramatic circumstances of the fire, it sparked widespread disdain among their peers. Both Richard and his affair partner faced cold stares and harsh judgments, a social penalty that visibly embarrassed them. Meanwhile, I settled into a new apartment, embracing my independence. The stability of my nursing career provided me with comfort, allowing me to take things slowly without rushing into another relationship. I reveled in my newfound solitude, appreciating the peace that came with it. Discovering my husband's affair, especially amidst the chaos of the fire, felt like a harsh twist of fate, yet it expedited the inevitable consequences he deserved. Now, as I adjusted to my single life, I looked forward to the possibility of meeting someone genuine in the future, without any rush, savoring each moment as it came. "This is the last gift I will ever give you," my husband declares coldly, sliding the divorce papers across the table. He confesses his plan to marry someone else, reducing me to nothing more than a financial asset he's used for years. The man I've shared so many intimate moments with has revealed himself to be utterly despicable. This marks the beginning of my tale of vengeance. My name is Helen, and this year, as I turn 52, I face a pivotal moment. Tomorrow isn't just another day, it's the end of a long period of debt that I will finally settle. My husband Scott and I have poured our sweat and tears into our life together since we tied the knot 22 years ago when I was 32 and he was 34. He owned a liquor store, a family business passed down from his late parents, while I worked in an office. We met through a mutual friend and quickly started dating, leading to marriage. Back then, my only worry was whether he'd expect me to help run the store. I was a financial consultant, advising individuals and businesses on insurance and investments. I earned a decent salary, loved my work, and was studying for a certification to further advance my career when Scott proposed. He assured me he supported my ambitions wholeheartedly. "I know how hard you've been working for your certification, and I want to support you in any way I can," he said. He had enough staff to manage the store, so he encouraged me to chase my dreams. His support was crucial in my decision to marry him. He seemed genuinely kind and always in my corner. We entered our marriage with a clear understanding. He would manage his business, and I would focus on my career. Our future seemed bright. However, about a year into our marriage, things began to shift. One afternoon, while I was enjoying a rare day off, I decided to vacuum under the bed. The vacuum snagged on something, a pile of papers. We had only moved in less than 8 months ago, so the mess surprised me. I curiously picked up a crumpled sheet and smoothed it out. The bold header instantly caught my attention. Reminder of payment. Below that, an outstanding debt of $320,000 in Scott's name stared back at me. It wasn't $3,000 or even $30,000. It was a staggering, life-altering amount. My heart pounded as I tried to comprehend why he'd hidden this from me. As soon as Scott returned home, I confronted him. "What is this debt? What's going on?" He didn't hesitate. "It's not what you think. This debt was left by my parents," he explained, his voice calm. It wasn't personal debt, but one tied to his liquor store, inherited alongside the business. The debt was secured against both the store's land and the house we lived in. Scott had no intention of renouncing the inheritance, no matter the risk. While it wasn't his fault, the debt was real and couldn't be ignored. "This is a payment reminder," I said, pointing at the paper. "Aren't you supposed to be making monthly payments?" "I do," he replied, though there was a hint of strain in his voice. "But sales can be inconsistent, especially during slower months." That was the moment I realized our marriage, and everything we built, was on shaky ground, and that this secret debt would soon unravel everything. "I can't cover the payments right now. I have to prioritize paying my staff, so I've asked the creditors to wait." Scott's explanation seemed reasonable at first, but the bold final notice on the reminder was hard to ignore. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry," he quickly added. "Don't stress about it. The business is doing well overall. Look, we haven't been evicted or anything, right?" Though what he said was technically true, the fact that he had kept this from me gnawed at me. I stared at him, my anxiety evident, but before I could process it further, he threw me a curveball. "If you're so worried, Why don't you help pay it off? You're earning quite a bit, aren't you? His suggestion sent a wave of unease through me. The store wasn't mine, and yet, in a marriage, aren't partners supposed to support each other? My debt is your debt too, he added abruptly. If my store went under, it would affect a lot of people. It's become crucial to the community. I couldn't deny that. His store was a cornerstone of the neighborhood, nestled in the suburbs where other shops and supermarkets were few and far between. He didn't just sell liquor, he offered fresh goods like meat and fish and even provided a home delivery service. I'd been to the store many times and I had seen firsthand how much the customers appreciated its presence. It wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline for many. Please, I need your help with the debt, he pleaded, his eyes sincere. I'll keep focusing on the business, but I can't do this without you. His dedication to his work was undeniable. The thought of the store closing wasn't just painful for him, it would also be a loss for the entire community. I felt the weight of the decision pressing on me. Being married means supporting each other through thick and thin, I reminded myself. If he was struggling, wasn't it only right for me to step in? Okay, I'll help, I finally said, though my voice felt heavier than usual. I'll put as much as I can toward the debt every month from my salary. You focus on running the store. I agreed, hoping this would stabilize things. After all, while I could help financially, the store was his responsibility to manage. At the time, I was relieved that he trusted me with something so important. But looking back, this was the moment everything began to change. 4 years passed since I started contributing to the debt, and in that time, Scott's late nights became more and more frequent. He would stumble in at all hours, reeking of alcohol. What kept you out so late? You smell like a bar, I'd ask, trying to mask my growing concern. Just had a few drinks with some customers, he'd respond casually, brushing it off. But with each late night, my worry deepened. Something was shifting, and I feared what might come next. When I asked, "Did you make this month's payment?" his response didn't come as easily as it should have. His tone was laced with condescension. "I did last week," he said. "You know the store relies on you. You better keep up with the payments," he added dismissively. At first, I brushed off these comments, thinking they were just the ramblings of a drunk. But as his demands became more frequent, they started to grate on me. It became clear that Scott genuinely believed it was entirely normal for me to shoulder his financial burdens. "By the way, Benjamin just had his third kid," he mentioned offhandedly one day. Benjamin, his old high school friend, was also a business owner whose wife worked alongside him in their store. His comment made me reflect on our situation, and I finally voiced the question that had been lingering in my mind. "I've been meaning to talk to you," I said, trying to gather my courage. "Don't you think it's time for us to start a family?" Scott's reaction was cold and dismissive. "A baby? My business is just beginning to pick up, and we're still in debt. How can we even think of that responsibility now?" His firm stance stunned me. "But Benjamin has 3 children," I countered, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Surely we can manage one?" "His situation is different," Scott retorted sharply. "His parents are still around to help, and his wife is actively involved in the business. We're not in the same position." His words crushed my hopes. "So, until all your debts are cleared, we can't even consider having a baby?" I asked, seeking some form of clarity. "That's how it's going to be," he said bluntly. "If you make enough money and pay off the debts quickly, then I'll think about it." His smirk made my stomach churn, but it also fueled a determination in me. I was naively committed, driven by the desire to start a family, even if his demands were irrational. I threw myself into work with renewed dedication, pursuing additional qualifications, taking on promotional exams, and securing salary increases, all in the hopes of resolving the debt faster and finally starting the life I had envisioned. I had started to earn significantly more than most women my age, even making advance payments on Scott's debts. My efforts were relentless, fueled by a mixture of hope and desperation. The debt hung over us like a constant shadow, and before I knew it, I was 40. The dream of having children had slowly slipped away. Despite this, I comforted myself with the thought that I still had my husband Scott. He needed me, and I believed in our life together. That belief kept me content. As the years passed, Scott began coming home later and later. Sometimes he wouldn't return until the next morning, always with the excuse that he had been with a customer and lost track of time. He was working hard to keep the store afloat, or so he said. Seeing his supposed dedication, I felt compelled to continue supporting him. We were in this together, I thought, sailing toward a better future. The years rolled on, and finally, the day approached when I would make the last payment on the debt. All the sacrifices, all the luxuries I had foregone. Soon, I wouldn't have to hold back anymore. I could finally enjoy the money I worked so hard for. Reflecting on our marriage, I realized how much of our life had revolved around finances. We had never taken a real vacation or even enjoyed a nice dinner out. Now in our 50s, I hoped we could start enjoying those things. On the day the final payment was due, I took the day off work to prepare a special celebration. I cooked an elaborate dinner, complete with a bottle of wine and Scott's favorite chocolate cake. I set the table beautifully, eager to celebrate our newfound financial freedom together. As I stood back, admiring the set, I thought about how quickly the last 22 years had flown by. It feels like it's been a long time, but the last 22 years have gone by so fast, haven't they, honey? I remarked as Scott walked in. His head was bowed, and his shoulders were trembling. Was he crying from happiness? Or was there another reason behind his emotion? To my utter shock, he erupted into a laughter I had never heard before, cold, mocking, almost sinister. What the hell is going on? Are you okay? I asked, bewildered and alarmed. With an air of audacity, Scott looked me in the eye and made a shocking declaration. You are dismissed now. I'm grateful to you for the past 22 years. Thanks to you paying off all my debt, I'm a free man. Great job. I don't need you anymore. His words left me stunned. What are you talking about? I managed to say, genuinely confused. He pulled a document from his bag and slid it across the table. This is my last present to you, he said smugly. The bold letters of a divorce petition seared into my vision. Proudly, he continued, I've decided to marry someone else, so you're no longer of any use to me. Thanks for being my cash dispenser until now. I stared at him, heart pounding. Are you getting remarried? Have you been cheating on me this whole time? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. His smirk told me everything I needed to know. I asked, piecing together the puzzle of his habitual late returns, all under the pretense of work or social engagements, while I worked tirelessly to clear his debts. His smug expression didn't falter for a second. I'm not unfaithful, he said casually. I've already found my next wife. I wanted to divorce you and marry her, which is why I waited for you to finish paying off my debt. Tears welled up as the absurdity of the situation hit me. The lavish feast I had prepared blurred before my tear-filled eyes. Get the hell out of here, he snapped, thrusting the divorce papers at me. My anger surged, boiling my blood faster than any sorrow or despair could settle in. Okay, but you'll regret this, I forced the words out, determined not to let him break me. No, I won't, he sneered. Why would I regret divorcing an old hag like you? Old hag? I thought to myself, almost amused. If I'm an old hag, then you're an old fart. His delusional self-image was so ridiculous it actually helped me regain my composure. Taking the divorce papers in hand, I declared calmly, I'm going to take this with me for now. With a heavy heart, I gathered my belongings and walked out of the home we had shared for 22 years. The abrupt end to my marriage left me reeling. Alone at last, tears of emptiness and frustration streamed down my face. I needed closure and justice. Soon after, I consulted with my attorney to draft a proper divorce agreement and sent it to Scott. I'd also requested a background check on his new fiancée, determined to understand what I was up against. Not long after, Scott called me, his voice thick with fury. Hey, Helen, what the hell is this document? He barked. I could almost imagine his face turning a deep shade of red on the other end. It's a divorce agreement. What about it? I replied, keeping my tone calm and even. I know what it is, he spat, but what's this about a loan agreement? Why do I have to pay you back? His voice was filled with disbelief and anger, confused by the financial claims I had laid out. This isn't just about a loan. It's about the money I paid on your behalf during our marriage, I explained. He struggled to grasp the situation, protesting, You chose to make those payments out of your own goodwill? This is ridiculous. Why are you bringing all this up now? Because, I said, my voice steady, our circumstances have changed, and you'll face the consequences. I did it as your wife, I responded firmly, but if we're getting divorced, that changes things. It's only fair you repay me. The reality of the situation seemed to hit him then. He hadn't considered the financial implications when he asked for the divorce. Armed with my years of experience working in insurance and investments and my connections with top-tier attorneys, I was prepared. The amount he owed me, including interest, was over $360,000. I was adamant about getting exactly that amount back. When he saw the name of a well-known local attorney on the document, he finally grasped the seriousness of the situation. "You know I don't have that kind of money," he protested weakly. "Sell the store to fund it then. If that's what it takes, so be it," I suggested. His response turned desperate. "If I do that, I won't have anything left." "You're only 54, I pointed out. "You can still find a job. It's time you figured it out, just like I have." My resolve was clear. I was determined to start my next chapter on my own terms, free from his debt and deceit. The conversation was going nowhere, and I was ready to end the call, but curiosity got the better of me. "So, how's it going with your new bride-to-be?" I asked casually. "None of your business," he snapped back. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. His tone said it all. It sounded like things weren't going as planned. "Good luck," I said, amusement still in my voice as I prepared to hang up. "Wait a minute," he interrupted urgently. "I've decided not to marry her. We can start over," he pleaded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Start over? Don't kid yourself. I don't want you," I yelled, finally losing my patience. I hung up, my head spinning with disbelief. Had I looked as ridiculous as him during our 22 years together? I had respected him once, watching him work tirelessly for his store and customers. But now, it was clear he was just a fool. The story of his remarriage had started innocently enough. He had flirted with a part-time university student named Elizabeth, saying, "You're so cute, Elizabeth. Will you be my wife?" She played along, jokingly responding, "Well, I'd think about it if you made me a full-time housewife." But he took her seriously. The idea of marrying a man over 40 years her senior was nothing but a joke to her, until he began pressing her persistently. It got serious enough that her parents intervened and obtained a restraining order against him. Reading the private investigator's report, I laughed so hard I started hyperventilating. All those nights he'd come home late, spitting stories of working late at the store. It had all been a lie, and the truth was utterly absurd. I used to think he was slaving away for his business, but in reality, he was spending his nights at bars and strip clubs, hitting on younger women, boasting about his so-called charm. "I'm surprisingly popular with young girls," he'd say, grinning smugly. "I'm a salesman, so I have this approachable aura. I get along with everyone." The report revealed the sad truth. His delusions were laughable. He'd tell the girls, "People often say I look young. Don't you think so?" They cringed, but he remained oblivious. To him, I was just a source of money, and his distorted view of himself turned him into a ridiculous figure, nearly landing him in legal trouble. Ironically, he wasn't unfaithful, not because he was loyal, but because he wasn't appealing enough to find a mistress. The whole mess started when his friend Benjamin became a grandfather. Enviously, my ex declared he wanted a grandchild too. I sharply reminded him that he could hardly afford to think like that while I was clearing his debts. He was humiliated. Looking back, I'm relieved I didn't waste my golden years with him. After we divorced, there was confusion over property division, but he didn't fight the settlement. My lawyer had a reputation for being tough, and it made me wonder how someone as spineless as him had ever run a business. In the end, he had to sell his shop to pay me off. Just before the sale, all his employees quit, and his customers were outraged that he was selling the family business to settle a divorce. It sent shockwaves through our community, but many felt he got what he deserved. The whole ordeal became a local spectacle, almost comedic in its absurdity. Even if he hadn't sold the shop, the negative publicity would have run him out of business eventually. Selling before hitting rock bottom was probably the only smart decision he made. Still, the sale didn't cover everything, so he's stuck working part-time to pay me back. Occasionally, he still sends me messages, admitting fault and begging for a reunion. Even after blocking him, he tries from new numbers. My attorney warned him that if he contacts me again, we pursue a restraining order. Thankfully, the calls have stopped since then. Looking back, I realize how fortunate I am to have escaped a life tied to his failures and fantasies. His desperate chase after a youthful mirage not only embarrassed him but also alienated everyone around him. Now, as he continues his part-time work to settle his debts, I'm grateful for the peace and independence I've found. His story is a cautionary tale, about living beyond one's means and the dangers of refusing to accept reality. As for me, guess what I'm doing now? I'm a marriage counselor. At 52, I joined a friend's matchmaking service, a complete shift from my previous career in finance and insurance. Back then, I helped singles manage practical life aspects but craved something more personally fulfilling. So, I took a leap into helping people find love. In my current role, I focus on helping couples start their relationships on the right foot, encouraging open, honest discussions about important issues like money and future plans. Our direct approach has resonated with clients and membership has soared. Having lived through my own ups and downs, I'm driven by a desire to help others avoid the mistakes I made. Though I earn less than before, the joy I feel from helping people build lasting relationships is immeasurable. Every day, I guide people toward happiness, and this work has become my new source of fulfillment. After separating from my ex, I discovered my own happiness, and now I'm helping others find theirs. Each day brings a new opportunity to make a positive impact, and this role has given my life a deep sense of purpose. Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca, your narrator. Today, I'd like to share my story. Like many of you, I've faced my fair share of challenges, particularly with my mother-in-law, Emma. She's the type who loves to take charge and frequently oversteps the boundaries that my husband, Anthony, and I have set. Despite our multiple warnings, we struggle to enforce these boundaries, allowing Emma to exert a considerable influence over our lives for quite some time. It's not that she was outright rude or openly disliked me, but she had her subtle ways of showing her discontent. She didn't hesitate to critique my personal style, and strangely enough, she didn't hold back on her comments about her own son either. The list of things she's done without our approval is extensive, but one particularly striking instance was our wedding. Emma took it upon herself to change everything, from the decorations and flowers to the cake. We managed to stop her from altering the venue, but for everything else, we had to either go along with her choices or incur financial losses. When confronted, her response was always that she believed she knew best and had superior taste. Her expensive preferences did little to mask her lack of respect for our choices, which was both insulting and frustrating. As for Anthony, he found it challenging to stand up to his mother. Cutting off contact was never on his radar. I tried my best to overlook her intrusions, and for a while, things remained stable. That was until Emma found a new way to assert her opinions. After years of saving, Anthony and I finally bought our dream home. It was perfect for us, and I took great care to decorate it in a way that reflected our personalities. However, Emma's reaction was far from pleasant. She criticized our choices and the way we'd styled the place, claiming it looked cheap and tasteless. She insisted we should have consulted her, but we made it clear that our decisions were final, and we loved our home just as it was. Despite her protests and offers to improve our space to her liking, we stood firm. Our home was a reflection of us, not her, and we intended to keep it that way. In sharing this, I hope not only to vent but to connect with others facing similar challenges. It's a reminder that while we can't control how others behave, we can choose how we respond and what we hold dear. I've never appreciated how forcefully Emma insisted we make changes based on her suggestions, but this time, Anthony and I were resolute in keeping her out of our decisions. Despite her relentless texts, calls, and unexpected visits, we held our ground. But Emma wasn't one to back down easily. She devised a more cunning approach to disrupt our peace. To celebrate finally purchasing our home after years of saving, Anthony and I decided to treat ourselves to a short vacation out of state. It had been ages since we'd been able to get away, and with a bit of extra money, it felt like the perfect opportunity. Our home was supposed to be empty during our trip, but a kind gentleman from our neighborhood in his 70s offered to keep an eye on it. He promised to notify us if anything seemed out of the ordinary, though we weren't expecting any trouble. Imagine our surprise when he called to inform us that he saw 4 women entering our house. Alarmed, we pressed for details, and one woman's description unmistakably matched Emma's. Confused and irritated, Anthony and I needed to understand what was happening. I called Emma directly to confront her. "Emma, what are you doing at our house? Our neighbor saw you and some people entering." She replied nonchalantly, "Oh, I'll be staying here for 2 weeks with my friends, just 4 of them. But don't worry, no wild parties or anything. We thought it would be nice to spend some quality time together. Plus, your house could use some looking after. Think of it as us house sitting for you." "But we're not even home. Why would you bring your friends over without us there?" I asked, bewildered. Don't fret, I'll entertain them. And with the recent break-ins around your neighborhood, consider this us keeping your place secure. It's better this way, especially with all the valuables you and Anthony have. We wouldn't want anything to go missing now, would we? Emma reasoned. While her justification had some merit, her approach was entirely uninvited and invasive. It was yet another instance of her crossing boundaries, disguised as concern for our new home. Her tone during our conversation left me feeling uneasy and suspicious. The casual way she mentioned house sitting felt too convenient, almost as if she had orchestrated this visit well in advance. The fact that she arrived with friends unannounced, knowing we weren't home, raised several red flags for me. It appeared she had used her key to enter our house, and I shuddered to think what could have happened if our neighbor hadn't noticed and informed us right away. I was grateful for his vigilance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my gratitude might be premature, as something unsettling loomed in my thoughts. I shared my concerns with Anthony, expressing how uncomfortable it made me that Emma was bringing strangers into our home. It just didn't sit right, and I struggled to understand her motives. Anthony seemed to take it in stride, believing it was fortunate that someone was looking after our home, which might deter burglaries. But my worries extended beyond the threat of theft. Emma's history of overstepping boundaries was well documented in our experiences with her, and this felt like another glaring example. He tried to reassure me, suggesting we address the issue with Emma once we returned home. He acknowledged that his reluctance to confront his mother had to change, especially given her recent actions. I understood his difficulty, knowing that Emma had raised him alone, but something had to give. I still felt anxious, not entirely reassured by Anthony's resolve. The following day, our neighbor's call only heightened my unease. He asked if we were still on vacation, and I explained Emma and her friends were at our house, supposedly to keep it safe. His next words sent a chill down my spine. He reported hearing a lot of noise coming from our home, not the usual sounds of someone living there, but more akin to renovation work. This unexpected news left Anthony and me speechless, grappling with the implications of Emma's actions in our absence. The situation was becoming increasingly alarming, challenging our initial perceptions and forcing us to confront the unsettling reality awaiting us upon our return. The revelation from our neighbor made everything fall into place. Emma, my mother-in-law, had often expressed her disdain for my decorating skills, deeming them tasteless while insisting she knew better. Her sudden silence regarding our decor after learning about our short getaway now felt ominously significant. Anthony speculated about the nature of the noises, wondering if there might have been a misunderstanding. However, the neighbor's observations of delivery trucks bringing in interior decoration items and the sight of Emma and her friends actively participating in the changes left no room for doubt. It turned out that one of her companions was a known interior decorator, a detail that only deepened our suspicions. The thought of Emma taking it upon herself to overhaul our home's interior without our consent was heart-wrenching. Both Anthony and I were in a state of disbelief and panic, grappling with the reality of her unwelcome intrusions. We expressed our gratitude to the neighbor for his vigilance and clarified that Emma's actions were unauthorized, underscoring the gravity of the situation. Overwhelmed by frustration and the urgent need to intervene, we knew we had to take action. I declared our vacation officially over. I couldn't enjoy another moment under the weight of this betrayal. Anthony shared my distress, apologizing for his mother's unrestrained actions and baffled by her choice to involve friends in this unwarranted project. Faced with no other option to halt Emma's endeavors before more damage was done, I contemplated involving the authorities. However, the thought of calling the police on Emma felt distressing for Anthony. Ultimately, the urgency of the situation outweighed our reservations. With Anthony's reluctant consent, I contacted the police to request a welfare check, citing the ongoing disturbances reported by our neighbor. Although this decisive action felt drastic, it seemed to be the only viable way to protect our home from further unauthorized alterations. When I called the police, I refrained from disclosing my suspicions but mentioned that my mother-in-law and her friends were staying at our house. Given the recent spike in burglaries, the police took my concerns seriously and conducted a welfare check. The feedback from the officers was nothing short of shocking. They reported that our home was in chaos, with ongoing demolition causing dust and damage everywhere. My carefully selected decorations were either mishandled or missing, a clear testament to their disregard for our belongings. Upon returning home, the reality was as bad as the police had described, if not worse. The images they shared revealed the extent of the havoc wreaked during our absence. Overwhelmed by the scene, I experienced an intense emotional breakdown, feeling inconsolable. Anthony, though deeply injured, managed to maintain his composure enough to engage directly with the police. He made it clear that his mother had massively overstepped by undertaking renovations without our permission, resulting in significant damage. The officers on site sympathized with our plight, acknowledging the financial and emotional toll of her unauthorized alterations. Faced with the choice of pressing charges for property destruction, Anthony and I agreed we wanted to hold Emma accountable for her actions. The police were supportive, offering to initiate the legal process on our behalf and promising to provide further documentation of the damage. In the meantime, we arranged for my sister to watch over the house until we could return. Anthony took charge, determined to ensure his mother faced consequences for her recklessness, while I unleashed every curse I could muster in my state of distress. I struggled to find the right words to express my feelings about Emma, but Anthony handled the situation with a level of calm and decisiveness that felt nothing short of heroic. He promptly arranged our return flights, determined to tackle the aftermath of Emma's intrusion as quickly as possible. Our immediate focus shifted to rectifying the chaos she had caused and beginning the arduous process of rebuilding what had been carelessly destroyed. Upon our arrival back in our hometown, we wasted no time and headed straight to the police station to take formal action against Emma's unauthorized renovations. We presented the officers with photographs showcasing her home's original state alongside the devastation she had inflicted. The officers were visibly appalled by the extent of the damage and suggested we pursue legal action for the havoc she had wreaked. My frustration and anger reached a boiling point as I became resolute in ensuring Emma learned a harsh lesson for her actions. Our decision to confront her at the police station where she was being held stemmed from a desire to face her directly and make her understand the gravity of her behavior. When we finally saw Emma, she responded with a feigned innocence and confusion, questioning why she had been incarcerated as if she were unaware of the chaos she had caused. Her lack of remorse, coupled with her insistence that she was merely helping us by imposing her tastes on our home, was infuriating. Anthony, equally incensed, challenged her delusion head-on, confronting her audacity and utter disregard for our wishes and property. Emma's defense dripped with entitlement as she asserted that her intentions were to enhance our home, completely oblivious to the personal and financial turmoil she had created. She even had the audacity to critique my taste, proposing to fix everything if released, unaware of the severity of her actions. However, our resolve was unyielding. We informed her that she would never be allowed near our home again, and that we were pressing charges for property destruction. It was in that moment that the reality of facing legal consequences seemed to dawn on Emma. Panic set in as she turned to Anthony, carefully trying to portray me as the villain for insisting on accountability and pleading for his intervention. Her desperate plea, however, fell on deaf ears. United in our decision, we were determined to see the legal process through, ensuring that Emma faced the repercussions for her unwarranted intrusion and alterations to our home. Watching her grasp the reality of her situation marked a pivotal moment in our stand against her overbearing and invasive behavior. Anthony unequivocally supported my stance, and as he spoke, I could see Emma's astonishment. "Mom, Rebecca's right," he asserted. "By transforming our home according to your preferences, you've disregarded our boundaries. It's time to face the consequences." After everything that had transpired, this was the final straw. Anthony firmly stated the breach of trust and respect that had occurred. Despite Emma's protests and her attempts to sway him with emotional appeals, he remained resolute. He emphasized the necessity of compensation for the extensive damage she had caused, highlighting the serious financial implications she now faced. When confronted with the reality of her actions and their consequences, Emma broke down. She hadn't anticipated the lawsuit or the significant dent it would make in her savings. Her tears and pleas for mercy were a stark contrast to her previous sense of entitlement. However, her claims of financial hardship did little to sway her decision. "You should have considered the consequences before taking such drastic actions," we countered. Her appeals for leniency, cloaked in claims of good intentions, were dismissed. Anthony and I recognized them for what they were: manipulation tactics. Our resolve remained firm, and despite Emma's tearful apologies and last-minute remorse, the damage to our home and our trust was irreparable. Leaving her at the police station, we returned home, ready to rebuild from the turmoil she had caused. Emma's release on bail and her subsequent uninvited appearance at our home only reinforced our decision. Once again, Anthony firmly delineated our boundaries, insisting on no further contact. Emma's desperate attempts to regain favor only confirmed the necessity of our actions in setting these boundaries and holding her accountable. Determined to protect our home, our peace, and our future from further disruption, we chose to remain in our damaged yet still habitable house. We awaited restitution through legal proceedings, and ultimately, the court ruled in our favor, mandating Emma to compensate us significantly. She narrowly escaped incarceration but was also ordered to cover our legal expenses. The judge expressed his disdain for her actions, reducing Emma to tears once more. However, any sympathy we had felt for her had long since evaporated. She was merely facing the consequences of her choices. Emma's social circle, including the friends she had involved in her scheme, quickly distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with her follies. Following the court's decision, Emma approached us tearfully, appealing for forgiveness and lamenting her financial hardships, which had worsened due to the cessation of the financial support Anthony had provided. For years he had generously given her an allowance, but he decided to halt it in light of her destructive behavior and the legal troubles that followed. Despite her desperate pleas highlighting her dire financial situation, we remained unmoved. Anthony stood firm in his resolve, stressing the importance of facing the repercussions of one's actions. Emma suggested moving into our guest room as a means to reconcile and perhaps regain financial stability, but we unequivocally refused. Anthony made it clear that she was no longer welcome in our home or our lives, signaling a period of no contact to allow us to heal and reassess her place in our lives, if there was any place left for her. Emma's reaction to Anthony's stance was one of disbelief and desperation, culminating in an emotional scene on our doorstep. However, having witnessed her manipulative tactics firsthand, we were resolute in our decision to sever ties. In the months that followed, we experienced newfound peace. The absence of Emma's judgmental presence allowed both Anthony and me to embrace a more carefree and positive outlook on life. This ordeal prompted us to consider maintaining this distance permanently, hopeful for a future free of turmoil and interference. As we navigate this journey, we seek support and understanding, believing that this decision will lead us toward the fulfilling life we've always envisioned. Hello everyone, I'm Jamie, and today I'd like to share an intriguing story about my mother-in-law, Sarah. Currently, Sarah has very little influence in our lives because we've made the difficult decision to cut ties with her. Getting to this point of no contact was far from easy. Sarah epitomizes narcissism. While I'm no psychologist, she exhibits all the classic signs of narcissistic personality. To put it bluntly, Sarah is self-centered and thoroughly unpleasant, always prioritizing her own needs above all else. In stark contrast, my husband Paul embodies everything she is not. I believe this difference largely stems from his upbringing, as he was primarily raised by his father after his parents' divorce when he was young. Tragically, he only reconnected with Sarah after his father passed away from a terminal illness. From the stories Paul has shared, it's clear that Sarah is excessively controlling and manipulative. He once confided in me, "Jamie, my mom demands so much from me. She feels entitled to everything I have and expects me to take care of her forever." He recounted how she used to take his entire paycheck when he started working during school. For years, Paul thought this level of control was normal, but I knew it wasn't healthy. "You were essentially enslaved," I told him. "You worked while she lounged around in her apartment. You need to make some serious financial changes." "I know," he replied, his frustration evident. "I've tried talking to her, but she always guilt-trips me about abandoning her or leaving her to fend for herself. I even suggested she find a job, but she refuses to listen." Paul struggled with his student loans while financially supporting Sarah, who had stopped working when he was just 17. The same year, he landed his first job. From that point on, he became the family's primary breadwinner, isolated from their extended family and completely under Sarah's strict control. He had no friends because she didn't allow it, and he could barely afford a phone. When Paul went to college, he was introduced to a whole new world, despite Sarah's attempts to keep him from attending. It was there, away from her overwhelming influence and among diverse people, that he finally recognized how abnormal his upbringing had been. 3 years into our relationship, I felt compelled to confront him about it. Paul, your mother has been emotionally abusive towards you. She's manipulated you for years and squandered the inheritance your father left you. Why do you continue to support her? What can I do, Jamie? He replied, his voice heavy with resignation. She's still my mom. After years of hearing that she deserves my money, it's hard to break free. I can't cut her off entirely. She's the only family I have left apart from you. I understand that, I said gently, but you need to reconsider your situation. You're drowning in debt. How much longer can you keep this up? Paul didn't have an answer. He realized that continuing to support Sarah meant he'd never escape his financial burdens, which made me question our future together. I was acutely aware that Sarah could become a significant obstacle, potentially trying to stake a claim on everything we owned. She already resented our relationship, saying things like, "Don't think you can take my son and his money. I'm his mother and the only one who deserves his things. You're just a gold digger trying to steal him away." "You need to stop relying on Paul," I retorted. "He's an adult, and so are you. You're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself." "Shut up, girl. Don't tell me how to live my life. I won't lose my lifestyle to someone like you. Paul will always be under my control, and I'll make sure of it," she snapped back, her words piercing but failing to intimidate me. Unlike Paul, I had a strong backbone and a knack for subtle revenge, which empowered me to handle Sarah without letting her harm us too deeply, even if I often endured her insults. As time went on, I found Sarah increasingly bearable. Both Paul and I completed college. I began working at a studio while Paul secured a fantastic position as a graphic designer. Despite his challenging upbringing, he was a dedicated student who achieved significant success. However, Sarah continued to exploit his finances without remorse. When Paul and I got engaged, Sarah was furious. She accused him of marrying a gold digger and expressed her worries about her own welfare. "How can you even think of getting married now? You still need to take care of me. This would be a terrible financial decision." "Mom, I'm already taking care of you, and getting married won't change that," Paul reassured her, but Sarah remained unconvinced. "But your wife will take all your money. You'll have nothing left for me. She doesn't earn much, and her mother is no help either. They'll just become a burden to you." "Excuse me, but my mom and I can manage perfectly well on our own." "We don't need to rely on your son," I interjected calmly, though her accusations stung. I held back the urge to tell her that she was the real financial burden. I knew that would only spark a pointless argument. I preferred to maintain the peace. Sarah saw my silence as an opportunity to further insult me and my family. My family, valuing respect and dignity, chose not to retaliate against her barbs, opting not to stoop to the level of arguing with a narcissist. Despite Sarah's attempts to sabotage our wedding plans, Paul managed the situation well. Although it frustrated him, he couldn't bring himself to completely sever ties with her. After our wedding, we settled into our new home. The specifics of how we acquired the house aren't relevant right now, but when Sarah found out, she was livid. She called me seething. "So, you've already started messing with my son's money? Buying expensive houses without even discussing it with me?" "I have no idea what you're talking about, Sarah. Besides, how Paul and I manage our finances is none of your business," I replied, standing firm. I cut the conversation short, replying firmly. Sarah's resentment was palpable. "You think you can live in a big house while I'm stuck in this small rented apartment? Mark my words, Jamie, you won't enjoy my son's house alone." At the time, I brushed off her threats. She had a knack for making dramatic statements, and I had learned to ignore her, refusing to give her the reaction she craved. That was until one day when something alarming happened. While I was at work, my mom called, sounding puzzled and concerned. "Jamie, why is your stuff at my house? Did something happen with Paul?" "What are you talking about, Mom? Nothing is wrong between us." "How do you know it's my stuff?" "The moving guys told me your name," she explained. This unexpected turn of events hinted at Sarah's deeper meddling, a dark reminder that my strategy of ignoring her might no longer suffice. "Jamie, your boxes arrived here with your name and address on them. I've opened a few, and they're filled with your clothes. What's going on? Did the movers say who sent them?" My heart sank with a dreadful suspicion. "They mentioned someone named Sarah," she replied, her voice laced with concern. "I think you should come home right away and sort this out." Taking her advice, I left work in a hurry and rushed home. As I stepped into my bedroom, a shocking sight greeted me. My drawers and closet were empty, even my bath products were gone. I was stunned. Descending to the living room, I found Sarah sitting there with a smug expression on her face. What the hell is going on, Sarah? Why did you touch my stuff and send it to my mom's house? I demanded, struggling to keep my composure. Her response was chilling. I'm here to set things right. From now on, only the homeowner and his mother will live in this house. A mother always has more rights than a wife. It's unfair for you to live here. What are you talking about? You're out of your mind. I shot back, my anger rising. Since the house belongs to my son, only he and I will stay here. You need to leave and go to a house that's in your name. So, you're saying only the person who owns the house should stay here? I clarified, trying to comprehend her twisted logic. That's exactly right, she replied, a triumphant glint in her eye. What I mean is, since I've already sent your stuff away, you can just leave. Don't worry, my son and I will be very happy here, she declared before turning and heading upstairs. I was furious at her audacity, unable to believe she was trying to throw me out of my own house. This house was in my name, and I was the rightful occupant. I couldn't let her force me out without taking action, so I made a strategic call. I immediately phoned Paul, urging him to come home as quickly as possible. He assured me he'd be there soon. When my mom arrived to check on the situation, we were both deeply unsettled, but I knew we needed to stand our ground against Sarah's outrageous attempt to usurp our home. When Sarah saw my mother, she was visibly flustered. What the hell, Jamie? Why is your mother here? I told you that you and your family can't be here. I've already sent your stuff to your mother's place. Then why is she here? I replied with a smirk. Well, you said that from now on, only the homeowner and the mother can stay here. So I called my mother and invited her over. This house is owned by my son. You should not be here. Sarah countered sharply. I demand that you leave immediately. I couldn't help but laugh, finding the irony delicious, and my mother joined in. Though I was angry, the laughter provided a welcome relief, reminding me of what needed to be clarified next. Once we composed ourselves, I turned to Sarah with a calm demeanor. Just for your information, my dear mother-in-law, this house belongs to me, I began, my tone even but firm. Yes. This house is in my name. It was part of my inheritance from my grandfather, who passed away recently. You can't be telling the truth. I don't believe you. This house cannot be yours. I know my son got this house for you. Sarah sputtered, disbelief etched across her face. Just wait till he comes home and shows you your place. I will not tolerate you keeping me away from the house. Sarah's confusion was met with a blunt correction from my mother. She's telling the truth, Sarah. You have some messed up logic about deserving your son's things. Even if the house is Jamie's, you shouldn't be so entitled. Jamie is Paul's wife and is equally entitled to his assets. I don't take advice from freeloaders, Sarah snapped at Rebecca. I suggest you keep your mouth shut. As for Paul, I will stay with him and ensure he divorces Jamie soon. Just a few minutes later, Paul walked through the front door, clearly bewildered by the sight of his mother standing in the middle of our living room. He looked even more puzzled to see my mother, whom I hadn't told him I invited over. Hey, guys, what's going on here? He asked as he entered. Jamie, you told me to come home soon. Has something happened? Something has happened, Paul. Your overbearing mother and her mother are trying to take over your house, Sarah declared dramatically. Paul, taken aback, responded firmly, Mom, what the hell is going on? Why would you disrespect my wife and her mother? They're right here. He then turned to me, giving me the floor to explain. Let me tell you what happened, I began, ready to unveil the absurd scenario Sarah had orchestrated. Paul stood in the middle of our living room, utterly stunned as he processed what I had just explained. Oh my God, are you serious? Mom, did you pack up Jamie's belongings and send them to her mom's house? Did you come into our home and move our things? Who gave you the right to do that? I'm just trying to help you, Sarah protested, feigning innocence. You need to reconsider your marriage. I've been telling you not to tolerate her freeloading behavior. Trust me, I can find you a better wife. Mom, I've told you so many times not to interfere in my marriage. Why are you still doing this? Paul's voice was firm, his frustration clear. I'm standing up for you. Your wife will drain your finances if you don't end this. That's why I moved into your house. I'm going to stay with you. You need to stop saying it's his house. I interjected firmly. Sarah, I've already told you this house is mine. If any mother is staying here, it will be mine. Paul looked exasperated as Sarah continued her tirade. Look at what your witch of a wife is saying. I told you she's a gold digger. She's already claiming this house is hers. Mom, stop insulting Jamie. This is ridiculous. Paul snapped, his patience worn thin. She's right, the house belongs to Jamie. It was part of her inheritance after her grandfather passed away. Sarah's face turned to ashen as the truth finally dawned on her. My mother chuckled slightly from the corner, enjoying Sarah's discomfort, while Paul looked like he was on the verge of losing his temper completely. Desperate to regain her composure, Sarah scrambled for another angle. It doesn't matter, since you two are married. This house is yours too, Paul. I have the right to stay here. Why should I live in a rented apartment when you have a house? I won't let Jamie take everything from me. You need to kick her out, Sarah insisted stubbornly. Mom, you need to leave, Paul declared, his voice rising with each word. I've had enough of you meddling in my marriage. No matter how much you dislike Jamie, I am not leaving her. I've made that abundantly clear. You've gone too far with your antics. There's no way you're staying here. Your wife is blackmailing you with the house, Paul. You can't stay with her. Trust me, it'll be so much better if you divorce her. I can find you a new wife. Sarah tried to manipulate the situation further. The tension escalated, and chaos ensued. Paul began shouting at Sarah, his anger boiling over, while I joined in, equally furious at her outrageous behavior. It was clear that this confrontation was reaching a breaking point. Finally, fed up, I took decisive action and kicked Sarah out. She looked desperately at Paul for support, but he couldn't even meet her gaze. I stormed to the guest room, grabbed her suitcases, and threw them out the door alongside her. Sarah spent a solid hour weeping on our doorstep until I warned her I would call the police if she didn't leave. Eventually, she got up and left. Inside, Paul was overwhelmed with guilt and began to apologize profusely. My mother discreetly slipped into the kitchen to give us some privacy. Jamie, I'm so sorry. I should have cut ties with my mom a long time ago. All these years, she kept attacking you, and I still allowed her into our lives. I thought she might change and accept you as my wife. But it's clear now that she never will, he lamented. Paul, I understand she's your mom, and you felt a duty to take care of her. But her behavior has been unbearable. She tried to kick me out of my own home, I replied, my voice firm yet weary. I know, Jamie, and I can't believe she went that far. But don't worry, she won't get away with this. I'm going to stop supporting her financially. She doesn't deserve my kindness after what she's done. You won't have to deal with her again, Paul promised, his tone resolute. We spent a long time discussing our boundaries and expectations moving forward, reaching a solid understanding that brought me considerable relief. To lighten the mood, my mother stayed for lunch, and we ordered some delicious meals through DoorDash. Despite the morning's upheaval, the day turned out fairly well, aside from my belongings being displaced. It was, in a way, satisfying to finally show Sarah that her behavior was unacceptable. My mother had spoken to the moving company, ensuring everything would be taken care of moving forward. When we arrived at her place and explained the situation, they agreed to return my belongings, though it would take some time. In the meantime, Sarah didn't stop her attempts to stir up trouble. She bombarded Paul with calls and sent me a barrage of texts, accusing me of controlling him and forcing him to cut her off. I shared all her messages with Paul, who was livid and found himself in several heated exchanges with his mother over the following days. It felt like we were trapped in an endless cycle of chaos. That cycle finally broke when we decided it was time to take legal action. We reported Sarah to the police, pressing charges for trespassing, theft, and harassment. The police were taken aback by the extent of her actions and took our complaints seriously. While Sarah hadn't been violent, her behavior was anything but rational. After the incident, we informed Sarah about the police report and had our lawyers begin the process of obtaining a restraining order. However, this didn't deter her. She showed up at our house, furious and unapologetic. How dare you file a police report against me? I'm your mother, and I deserve respect. Paul, you can't do this to me, she screamed. I'm done being quiet. What you did was a criminal offense. I don't care what the law says. I'm entitled to be in this house. You've even stopped paying me money. I have nowhere to go. You know I did my lease to live here. I demand you let me in and remove the police report. That will never happen, Mom. Besides, you don't deserve my money after trying to destroy my marriage, Paul replied firmly. Sarah, you need to stop shouting at our door. We decided that only the homeowner and her mother will stay here from now on. Since you are neither, you need to leave. My words pushed Sarah over the edge, causing her to have a breakdown right on our doorstep. Neighbors began peeking out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. At one point, a neighbor approached our front door to ask if he should call the police, but when Sarah lunged at him and shouted, he didn't hesitate to dial 911, letting them hear her outburst. My mother-in-law continued her tirade until the police arrived and arrested Sarah. This unfortunate spectacle provided us with the necessary evidence to secure a restraining order, especially since Sarah had also been harassing my mother. Then Paul suggested a surprising solution. "Jamie, I think we should let your mom stay with us for a while," he proposed. "Sarah knows her address and won't stop harassing her. She's becoming increasingly unhinged, and I'm worried she might escalate her behavior. It would be safest if Rebecca stayed here." "Are you sure about this, Paul? I don't want you to feel uncomfortable with her living here, and I don't think Mom would want to impose," I responded, concerned about how the dynamics might affect him. Paul assured me, "I feel bad for Rebecca, and it's the right thing to do. I don't mind at all. It's better for everyone's peace of mind if she stays with us for now." "I know Rebecca is a reasonable person, Jamie. I'd have no problem with her staying here. She's very respectful of our boundaries." That joke between us brought out a hearty laugh, lightening the mood despite the circumstances. I could see that Paul was still struggling with the fallout from his mother's actions, but he was earnestly trying to distance himself from her toxic influence. Cutting ties with a narcissistic parent is a complex and painful process, and we've been discussing therapy for Paul to help him navigate these emotional waters. He's open to the idea but needs some time to organize his thoughts. Understanding his mental state, I'm doing my best to support him. Meanwhile, cut off from directly contacting us, Sarah has been trying to appeal to my mom, Rebecca, to garner sympathy. She laments how unfairly she's been treated, claiming she has nowhere to go and is now living in her car. Over the years, Sarah has alienated so many people that no one is willing to take her in. Paul remains firm in his decision not to support her financially anymore, forcing Sarah to confront the reality of finding a job, an idea that terrifies her, especially with several police reports and an arrest on her record. We've reached a point where we are indifferent to her plight. I can candidly say that I am relieved to see Sarah facing the consequences of her actions. This tough love is long overdue, and while it's harsh, it's necessary for our peace and to finally bring some sanity back into our lives.
Charles's voice cut through the clamor of the kitchen, sharp and demanding like the edge of a cleaver. "Cynthia, bring me some tea now." I paused, my hands still submerged in soapy water. "Wait, I'm doing the dishes." His tone thickened with disbelief and impatience. "Stop that and bring me the tea quickly. Can't you follow simple orders?" Before I could reply, he interrupted. "What a useless wife you are." His words stung, but the next command came from Kelly, my mother-in-law, lounging in the living room with a slice of cake she'd pilfered from the fridge. "Make me some sweet coffee, please." Her eyes twinkled with mischievous delight, but it only deepened my frustration. I sighed, my gaze falling on the towering stack of dirty dishes. There were too many, but Kelly's demand left me no room to protest. "Leave them for later," she said dismissively. "Just do what we say." Useless wife. Charles's words echoed in my mind, each one a lash against my spirit. I am Cynthia, 30 years old, a working mother, caught in a life that felt less like a home and more like a prison. My only solace was my 5-year-old son, who shone as a tiny beacon in an otherwise dim existence. We lived in Charles's parental home, an arrangement I had reluctantly agreed to, under the pretense of caring for Kelly after my father-in-law's death. At first, I sympathized with her grief, but it quickly became clear that I was nothing more than a pawn in her power struggle. No matter how hard I tried, cooking, cleaning, working, it was never enough. My efforts were met with scorn. "These sautéed vegetables and shrimp are so half-hearted," Kelly would sneer. "Cook it properly, from scratch." "I'm busy and can only make simple things," I'd explain, struggling to keep my composure. "That's why I hate back talk from a daughter-in-law," she'd snap. "Cook from scratch." Trapped in this unrelenting cycle of demands and criticism, I longed for a change, for the peace that always seemed out of reach. One day, I hesitated before asking, knowing the answer would be cold and dismissive. "So, you're a good cook, right?" Her response was frosty, sharp. "Why would I do housework when you're here?" Her words stung like a slap, and with them, the realization that I was truly nothing more than a servant in their eyes. Over time, They stopped acknowledging my presence altogether. I became a ghost in my own home, only noticed by my son, whose love was the only thing that kept me tethered to this place. 6 years passed under this oppressive cloud. My son was growing, but the atmosphere remained unchanged. Kelly, now 65, seemed to take a twisted pleasure in my misery. One evening, as I returned home from work, the weight of my reality finally sank in. I was invisible, my existence meaningless. I was a shadow in their lives, except for my son, whose recognition I cherished. The thought of losing even that was unbearable. I threw myself into cooking, hoping to stave off the creeping sadness. Sichuan chili chicken, crispy fish fillets, and beef and broccoli stir-fry. It was my attempt at normalcy, a glimmer of hope for a decent dinner, but Charles shattered the silence with a command. "Bring me the mayo," he ordered abruptly. I handed it to him, my frustration bubbling inside. His first words to me in days were not a thank you or even a conversation, but another order. It was the final straw. Then Kelly spoke up. "Clean the toilet, right now." I was stunned. "Yes, right now," she insisted, venom dripping from her words. Unable to contain my frustration any longer, I protested. "Don't say such things while we're eating. It's disgusting, just like your heart." Her eyes narrowed, and the argument escalated quickly. Charles intervened, demanding an apology, but this time, I stood my ground. For the first time in years, I confronted them, and the conflict reached its boiling point. I knew, then, that I had to make a change, for my son and for my own well-being. That night, I retreated to my room, filled out divorce papers, and presented them to Charles. His face registered shock, but within me surged a quiet determination. "I'm filing these," I said, meeting his gaze with unwavering certainty. For the first time in years, I felt as though I had stepped out of the shadows and was finally ready to reclaim my life. In the days that followed, the household simmered with harsh glares and biting comments, but amid the tension, I experienced a strange sense of liberation. One evening, while serving dinner, Kelly scoffed at the meal. "You call this food? Even a child cooks better." I swallowed my frustration and focused on my son's beaming smile. "Eat up, sweetheart, I made your favorite tonight." Charles, ever the sarcastic one, chimed in. "Oh, now you're the perfect mother, huh? What a joke." Anger stirred inside me, but I held my composure, determined not to let their cruelty break me. "I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son," I said, trying to hold on to my composure. Kelly scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Don't act like you're better than us. You're just a nuisance in this house." The tension at the dinner table was thick, as Charles continued to hurl insults. His words stung, but I stood my ground. "So, Cynthia, have you thought about how you'll manage after the divorce? You can barely run a household, let alone take care of your own life," he sneered. I looked him in the eye, unshaken. "I've been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself or our son." For a brief moment, his smirk faltered, and I saw a flicker of unease pass across his face. Before he could respond, Kelly interjected. "Don't be ridiculous," she said sharply. "You rely on us more than we rely on you." The conversation shifted, and for the first time, we ventured into the one topic they usually avoided: finances. "You know," I said calmly, but firmly, "without my paycheck, this household would be struggling. I'm done relying on you. I'm ready to start fresh and take care of what matters, our son." Kelly's dismissive laugh echoed in the room. "We'll manage. We don't need your charity." But Charles remained silent, his discomfort palpable. His lack of response spoke louder than anything he could have said. Deep down, he knew I was right. The days that followed were filled with mounting tension. Kelly bounced between pretending to plead with me to stay and throwing insults when I held firm. Charles, however, retreated into himself, his usual arrogance crumbling under the weight of the reality he was financially dependent on me, and that was something he couldn't ignore. Then, one afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them that froze my blood. "Leaving her is not an option," Charles hissed, his voice low and tight. "We rely on her money." Kelly's response was chillingly cold and calculated. "Don't worry, I have a plan. We'll make her life so miserable that she won't even think about leaving." The realization hit me like a slap in the face. They didn't care about me or our son. To them, we were nothing more than pawns in their game of control and financial manipulation. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of the situation settled heavily on me. A plan was beginning to form in my mind, a plan to fight back. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one. But this battle wouldn't be fought with words. I would hit them where it would hurt the most, their pride and their finances. The next morning, I took my first steps toward reclaiming my life. I set my plan into motion by reaching out to a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer. I want a divorce, I told her firmly, and I want to make sure they don't get more than they deserve. She nodded, her expression resolute. We'll make sure of that. You've been the primary provider, right? We'll use that. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I started documenting everything, the insults, the financial manipulation, and even the smallest grievances. It was time to make them accountable, to show them that their actions would have consequences. I was no longer just trying to survive. I was fighting back. This was about reclaiming my life and securing a better future for my son. As I collected the evidence, a newfound strength began to rise within me. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own life. The cloud of disrespect that had hung over me for so long was starting to lift, replaced by the promise of a fresh start. But as the divorce proceedings began, the tension at home only escalated. Despite that, I no longer feared their tactics. Each day, my determination solidified, and the doubts that once clouded my mind began to fade away. One evening, Kelly tried a different approach. Her voice oozed with false sweetness. Cynthia, dear, why don't we forget all this unpleasantness? You know we're family. I met her gaze, unwavering. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. Charles, who had been quiet until then, scoffed dismissively. Oh, now you're the victim. You're not as innocent as you pretend. Despite the rising anger inside me, I kept my voice steady. I'm not pretending anything, Charles. I simply refuse to be your punching bag any longer. I knew the conversation would eventually turn to money, and sure enough, it did. You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him? Charles sneered. I answered with calm confidence. I've been supporting this family for years. I'll manage. Kelly sneered, her words dripping with contempt. You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back, begging to return. Their words no longer had power over me. I had come to understand my worth, and I knew the truth of our situation. The following day, I met with my lawyer again, and she laid out our strategy with precision. We'll highlight their financial dependence on you, she said. That'll be key in the custody battle and asset division. I nodded, feeling a sense of validation and support. The legal system was on my side, and I was fully prepared to assert my rights. At home, tensions reached new heights. Kelly's attempts to belittle and intimidate me became more desperate. One evening, her voice was laced with venom. You think you're clever? Standing tall, I didn't flinch. I had already seen their true colors, and I was ready to move on. Armed with evidence, legal support, and a renewed sense of self-worth, I faced Kelly's accusing glare. She spat, but you're just abandoning your family. I looked her in the eye, my resolve unshaken. No, I'm finally standing up for myself. Charles, his voice seething with anger, chimed in. You'll regret this. You can't survive without me. But his threats were hollow now. They no longer had power over me. I had moved beyond fear. As the court date drew closer, I prepared for the legal battle ahead. I organized financial records, documented their spiteful comments, and compiled evidence of their neglect. One quiet afternoon, as I sorted through my papers, my son came to me, his voice filled with uncertainty. Mom, are we going to be okay? I pulled him into a tight, protective embrace. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place and starting a new, happy life, just you and me. His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew with complete certainty that I was doing the right thing. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for my son's future. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, bringing with it a mix of dread and anticipation. I was ready to face Charles and Kelly, to finally break free from their control and manipulation, determined to reclaim my life. I was committed to securing the peace and happiness my son deserved. This day was about justice, and I was resolute in seeing it through. Sitting across from Charles and Kelly in the courtroom, a surreal mix of emotions washed over me. This was the moment of change, the end of their reign. As the proceedings began, Charles's lawyer painted him as a devoted husband and father, falsely accused, while Kelly cast herself as a grieving mother-in-law, wronged by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. But I was ready, armed with evidence and a newfound resolve. I was prepared to expose the truth and move forward. Their performances were transparent, their lies blatant. When it was my turn to speak, I did so with clarity and composure. For years, I've been the sole breadwinner in this family. while my husband's unemployment and his mother's manipulation have only worsened our struggles. Charles interrupted, feigning hurt. Cynthia, how can you say such things? I met his gaze unflinchingly. Support isn't about words, Charles, it's measured by actions, and yours have been nothing but selfish and cruel. The judge listened intently as I presented my case, financial records, audio recordings of their verbal attacks, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed their behavior. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Charles's self-righteousness, and Kelly's calm facade crumbled, revealing her true nature. The room fell silent as my lawyer introduced the final blow, photographs and documents revealing Charles's infidelity, as well as Kelly's secret affair with a neighbor. Jacob, gasps filled the air, and Charles's eyes widened in disbelief. Kelly's face twisted in fury. You violated our privacy, she screamed. I met her glare without hesitation. No, I merely uncovered the truth, a truth you both tried to hide for far too long. The judge called for order, but their credibility had been shattered. The damage was irreversible. The court's ruling came swiftly. I was awarded full custody of our son, and the assets were divided equitably. Charles and Kelly were left with nothing but their shattered reputations. As I left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The years of manipulation and mistreatment were finally over. I had stood up for myself, and I had won. This victory wasn't just for me, it was for my son's future, for a new life free from their shadow. The most triumphant moment came just outside the courthouse when my son ran to me, his face beaming with relief. We did it, Ma, he exclaimed. Yes, we did, I replied, pulling him into a tight embrace. We're free now, this is just the beginning for us. As we walked away together, I felt an overwhelming sense of victory. This wasn't just a win for me, it was a win for anyone who has ever felt powerless. It was a victory for truth, for fairness, and it marked the start of a new chapter filled with hope and the promise of a better future. In the days that followed, news of Charles and Kelly's deceit spread quickly through our tight-knit community, tarnishing their reputations. They could no longer maintain their facade of respectability. I focused on rebuilding my life with my son, but I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction knowing that Charles and Kelly were finally facing the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I prepared dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived at my door, Hannah, Jacob's wife. Her eyes were filled with tears. Cynthia, I've heard everything. I can't believe what Kelly did. I invited her in, and over tea, she shared her heartbreak. I trusted her, as a neighbor, as a friend, to think she was having an affair with my husband. I listened, offering comfort, realizing just how deeply Kelly's betrayal had reached. The next day, I crossed paths with Charles in town. He looked defeated, a shadow of the man he once was. His arrogance was gone. What's left to say, Charles? I asked. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I'm sorry for everything, he murmured. His apology was weak, but it marked a shift. He finally recognized how much he had depended on me, how much he had taken for granted. But it was Kelly who bore the brunt of the fallout. Her affair with Jacob didn't just destroy her reputation, it led to serious legal trouble. Hannah filed for divorce and sued her for alienation of affection, adding a legal stain to Kelly's scandal. The whispers through our neighborhood painted a vivid picture of Kelly's downfall, of a woman undone by her own misdeeds. She became an outcast, shunned by the very people she had once considered her friends. One afternoon, I saw her at the grocery store. She moved quickly down the aisles, trying to avoid attention. Our paths crossed, and our eyes met. The resentment and defeat in her gaze were unmistakable. You did this to me, she hissed as she passed. I watched her retreat, a complex mix of pity and vindication rising within me. No, Kelly, I whispered to myself, you did this to yourself. The tables had turned. The consequences of their actions were now unavoidable. Charles and Kelly were finally facing the repercussions of their years of deceit and manipulation. As I focused on my son and our fresh start, I realized that the greatest form of revenge was simply living well, free from the toxicity that had once overshadowed my life. This journey wasn't about vengeance, it was about freedom, breaking free from the cycles of abuse and control that had bound us. Looking ahead, I felt nothing but hope. This new chapter wasn't just a twist of fate, it was a well-earned beginning, full of possibilities and free from the shadows that once loomed so large.
Hello, my name is Julie, and I'm 42 years old. I've been reflecting on a particularly difficult time in my life that began when I decided to end my marriage to Thomas. It became increasingly clear that we simply weren't meant for each other. His childish and immature behavior constantly frayed my nerves, and the thought of being tied to him for life felt less like a partnership and more like a sentence. However, the strain in our marriage wasn't entirely due to Thomas. His mother, Martha, played a significant role in my distress from the very beginning. She made it clear that I would never meet her high expectations for her son. Her relentless criticism and subtle undermining eroded my confidence, making me feel like an outsider in my own home. I recall countless evenings returning home from work, yearning for peace, only to find Thomas absorbed in his video games, completely disregarding me and our shared responsibilities. Any attempt I made to voice my frustrations was met with indifference. "Thomas, I've had a tough day. Could you help out with some chores?" His typical response was dismissive. "Later, I'm in the middle of this game." This disregard extended beyond our daily lives. He even forgot our anniversary, brushing it off when confronted with a casual, "It's just a date. We can celebrate some other time." Another time, he invited his overbearing mother over without informing me, turning what I had hoped would be a peaceful weekend into an unwelcome family gathering. "She's my mom, Julie. She can come whenever she wants." "Don't be uptight," he said. Discussing financial planning was another sore spot. Talking about budgeting or savings with Thomas felt like conversing with a child. "You worry too much. Let's just enjoy our money. We'll figure it out later," he would argue. These examples only scratched the surface of the deep-rooted issues in our marriage, where my concerns were routinely dismissed and my feelings invalidated. At family gatherings, Martha took pleasure in belittling me, never missing an opportunity to criticize my appearance, career, or even my cooking. I remember one evening, after spending hours preparing a meal, I hoped for a little appreciation. "Martha, I spent hours on this dinner. I hope you enjoy it." Her response was sharp and cutting. "Well, let's see if it's even edible. I can't trust your cooking." Another instance involved a new dress I was excited about. "Martha, I found this beautiful dress that I think would look great on me." Her reply was equally dismissive. "Oh, sweetie, that dress is far too revealing for someone your age. You don't want to embarrass yourself, do you?" And when I tried to assert my parenting style, she was just as dismissive. "Martha, I would appreciate it if you didn't criticize my parenting decisions." "I know what's best for my children," she retorted. "Clearly, you don't, or you wouldn't be making such foolish choices. Honestly, what is wrong with you?" When I shared my efforts to adopt a healthier lifestyle, hoping for support, she belittled me. "Oh, please, you're wasting your time with all that exercise and dieting. You'll never look as good as me." Her justification was blunt. Whenever I asked her to stop making snide remarks about me to others, she responded with, "I'm just telling the truth, dear. People should know what they're dealing with when it comes to you." Martha's constant belittlement and disparaging comments became a relentless source of stress, undermining any positive aspects of my relationship with Thomas. The breaking point came when I realized I deserved more than this toxic dynamic. It was a difficult decision, but I filed for divorce, seeking liberation from the emotional turmoil that had consumed me. In court, I laid bare the irreconcilable differences and the detrimental impact of our marriage on my well-being. As the proceedings concluded, I began to feel the weight lifting. Martha, my ex-mother-in-law, could hardly conceal her pleasure. She leaped up, a twisted smile of victory spreading across her face, reveling in the dissolution of our marriage. Her delight in my supposed defeat was as blatant as it was unsettling. Finally free from the shackles of a troubled marriage, I stood in the courtroom as Martha proclaimed triumphantly that she had won her son back. "I've won! I finally won!" Her declaration, soaked in delight, hung heavily in the air, igniting a surge of anger and indignation within me. How could she take pleasure in my pain, celebrating the end of my marriage as if it were her victory? I couldn't hold back my fury. With contempt lacing my voice, I confronted her, exposing the miserable and pathetic person she truly was. Instead of faltering, Martha only laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed through the courtroom. It was a cruel soundtrack to the closing of a chapter that had brought me nothing but distress. It served as a stark reminder that some people revel in the downfall of others, their joy twisted by bitterness. But her laughter only fueled my resolve to move beyond the toxicity that had ensued. Walked out of that courtroom, I left behind the ruins of a failed marriage and a toxic relationship, determined to reclaim my life. I vowed to reclaim my life and pursue the happiness that had long eluded me. Martha's mocking joy highlighted the struggles I had endured and the inner strength I had discovered. No longer would I allow the judgments of others or the cruelty of those intent on belittling me to define my worth. I was determined to rise above the bitterness and embrace the freedom that lay ahead. With each step I took, I embarked on a journey of self-discovery and healing, committed to building a life that reflected my true value. The road ahead was uncertain, but I faced it with unwavering resolve. The path to happiness might not be straightforward, yet the struggles and hardships I had faced had forged resilience within me. It was time to leave behind the drama, toxicity, and emotional scars, stepping into a future brimming with hope, self-love, and the promise of brighter tomorrows. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end here. When Martha gloated about her victory, she expected to gain something tangible, something she believed she had finally secured. But fate had other plans. She thought she would inherit a coveted family heirloom, the stunning diamond orchid necklace, a piece with exquisite design passed down through generations and valued at millions due to its rarity and craftsmanship. Whenever Martha saw the necklace, her eyes sparkled with unmistakable greed. Yet, throughout my marriage to Thomas, it remained tantalizingly out of her reach. During our years together, Martha often suggested selling the necklace to fund more practical needs, but each time, I firmly rejected her idea. I explained that the necklace was not only valuable, it held deep sentimental significance as a vital part of my family's legacy. Despite her relentless attempts to sway my decision, I stood resolute in my commitment to keep the necklace within my family. After the divorce was finalized, Martha believed she might somehow benefit from the necklace's value, thinking she could claim a share that would satisfy her materialistic desires. What she didn't know was that I had other plans in mind. A month had passed since the divorce when, unexpectedly, I heard a familiar knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Martha standing there, her face streaked with tears and her voice trembling. "Julie, please, I need to talk to you," she pleaded. Despite my mixed feelings, curiosity laced with reluctant sympathy, I stepped aside and let her in from the cold. Once settled in the living room, I encouraged her to share what was on her mind. Through her sobs, Martha struggled to articulate her thoughts, revealing the collapse of her carefully laid plans. "My plan, it failed, Julie. I thought I'd finally have what I wanted, but everything has gone wrong." With a hint of skepticism, I pressed her for details, intrigued by her apparent defeat. "What plan are you talking about, Martha? Why are you so upset?" Taking a deep breath, Martha tried to compose herself. "I thought that after the divorce, Thomas would be entitled to half of the heirloom's value," she confessed. Her scheme had hinged on manipulating her son to secure a piece of my family's treasure, a plan now clearly in ruins. I thought I had triumphed, but then Thomas dropped a bombshell that shattered all my hopes. Curiosity mixed with a dose of satisfaction urged me to lean in closer. "So what did Thomas reveal, Martha? I'm listening." Wiping away her tears, her voice filled with regret and disbelief, she said, "He told me he forgot to mention a prenuptial agreement he signed before we got married. It clearly stated that the heirloom, along with all your money, was completely off limits. I never stood a chance." I couldn't help but burst into laughter, a wave of relief and vindication washing over me. "Oh, Martha, you have no idea how much I anticipated this moment. I knew all along that your manipulative schemes would unravel." Martha's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. "You knew all along and still let me believe I had won? How could you?" Leaning back in my chair, a sense of triumph radiated from within me as I replied with a satisfied smile, "Oh, Martha, I didn't let you believe anything. You saw what you wanted to see. Blinded by your greed, I knew the truth would eventually come out." As the reality of her folly sank in, Martha's tears shifted to a mix of frustration and regret. She had played her hand, and it had spectacularly failed, leaving her with nothing. "I can't believe you signed that prenup," she said incredulously. "I was hoping to at least get some of your money after the divorce." "Martha, I signed the prenup precisely for situations like this. I anticipated a time when someone might try to take what's rightfully mine. You were never really about being the good wife, were you?" "How could you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This isn't about being the good wife, Martha. It's about protecting myself and my assets from manipulative people like you. I had the foresight to secure my future," I explained, unapologetic. "But I need the money, Julie. I'm desperate," she pleaded, her desperation evident. "That's not my problem, Martha. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with the consequences. It's time for you to leave my house. You're so cruel and selfish, she shot back. I'm not the one who tried to deceive and manipulate for personal gain. You reap what you sow. Now please, leave. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by Martha's sobs. The weight of her failed schemes filled the space, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of her actions. As the reality of her situation dawned on her, Martha faced the painful truth. Her greed and deceit had left her with nothing. Despite her predicament, I remained firm, resolute in defending my rights and protecting what was rightfully mine. My experiences had taught me that trust and love should not blind one to the potential for betrayal. As Martha prepared to leave, her expression reflected a mix of anger and resignation, the bitterness of her choices hanging heavily in the air. With a resentful tone, she spat out, "You call me heartless. Martha, reflect on how you treated me throughout my marriage to Thomas. You were the one who was vindictive, cruel, and manipulative," I retorted. "You're exaggerating. I never treated you badly," she protested defensively. "Oh really? Shall I remind you how you purposefully excluded me from family events, belittled my achievements, and spread rumors about me? You seem to relish my distress." "I did no such thing. You're just trying to paint me as the villain." Martha's voice grew more desperate. "Enough of your lies and manipulation. Leave my house now, or I will call the police. I'm giving you an ultimatum," I declared firmly. "Please, Julie, just give me some money. I need it," Martha pleaded desperately. "You have 50 seconds to leave my property. This is your last chance." "You can't do this to me, Julie. I'm family," she protested. "Good riddance, Martha." As the seconds ticked away, her face twisted with anger, disbelief, and defeat. Realizing that her manipulative tactics had failed, she turned and walked toward the door. The tension in the air was palpable as she exited, leaving behind a trail of regrets and the consequences of her actions. A blend of relief and liberation washed over me as I stood tall, having cut ties with toxicity and reclaimed my independence. The next day, as if on cue, another figure from my past emerged, seeking reconciliation. "What do you want, Thomas?" I asked warily. "Julie, I need your help. I'm in a tough spot right now, and I was hoping—" "Save it, Thomas. I don't want to hear your excuses. You dare to call instead of facing me like a man? How cowardly can you be? I thought it would be better this way. Julie, please, just hear me out." "All right, Thomas. I'm listening," I said, bracing myself for what was to come. "Why don't you start by explaining how you constantly belittled my ambitions, mocked my dreams, and made me feel like I was never good enough? Do you even remember any of that?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Julie. Sure, we had our disagreements." "Disagreements?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "I call it emotional abuse. You tried to undermine me at every opportunity, hoping to break my spirit. Well, guess what? I'm done with it. I deserve better." "Julie, please, I'm sorry for everything. I'm in a tough spot right now, and I thought maybe—" "It's funny, Thomas," I cut him off. "You agreed to the prenup, yet here you are, begging and sniveling. Didn't you know what you were signing, or did you just assume you'd change my mind later?" "I didn't fully understand it back then. I just knew that I loved you," he stammered. "Cut the crap, Thomas. You always had an angle, and now you're out of options." "Julie, I don't know what to say." "Yeah, I figured as much. You've always been at a loss for words when it matters. Listen to me, Thomas. This is the last time I'll say this. If you try to contact me again, I will get a restraining order. Do you understand?" "But Julie?" "No, Thomas. It's over. Goodbye." With that, I hung up the phone and deleted his number, feeling the sense of finality wash over me. I was finally free from both him and Martha, and the relief was palpable as I reflected on the journey I had traveled since the end of my tumultuous marriage. A profound sense of contentment washed over me. I found myself in a much better place both mentally and emotionally, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, allowing me to breathe freely again. Life had taken some unexpected turns, but now I was relishing the joys it had to offer, fully embracing my newfound independence. I ventured back into the dating world, meeting new people, and experiencing the exhilarating excitement of romantic connections. Throughout it all, I learned to value my worth and refused to settle for anything less than the love and respect I deserved. Beyond the thrill of new relationships, I found solace and empowerment in sharing my story. The journey I endured during my marriage inspired me to write a memoir recounting the trials and tribulations of my past. It stands as a testament to the strength I discovered within myself. A story of overcoming adversity and finding empowerment in the aftermath of a challenging life chapter. I unearthed a profound strength that serves as a beacon of hope, compelling me to share it with others who have walked similar rugged paths. My writing emphasizes the critical importance of self-love and the courage needed to escape damaging relationships. As I move forward, I can hear the distant rumblings of discontent from my ex-husband and former mother-in-law, their envy unmistakable as they observe my blossoming success and well-being from afar. Their miscalculation of my inner fortitude has left them grappling with the repercussions of their actions. While I've distanced myself from their toxicity, their attempts to tarnish my reputation persist. Martha and Thomas have made a few feeble attempts to discredit me, trying to drag me down to their level of despair. Yet I remain unshaken and undeterred, firm in my resolve to take legal action against their defamatory statements. Their provocations only fuel my determination to see justice served. This new chapter of my life is steeped in gratitude for the resilience I've discovered within and for the solid support system surrounding me. Encircled by friends and family who uplift and inspire me, they cheer on my transformation and motivate me to continue reaching for greater heights. From the ruins of a shattered marriage, I have emerged not only unscathed but fortified, enlightened about my worth and more determined than ever to live freely and fully. This journey, though fraught with challenges, has catapulted me to a realm of self-empowerment and authenticity. My life's narrative is no longer defined by the shadows of pain but illuminated by the triumphs of overcoming and thriving. Having moved past the darkness, I now bask in the light of promising new beginnings. As I pen the ongoing chapters of my life, I approach each page with renewed purpose, seizing the happiness that had previously eluded me. Every word I craft is a step toward reclaiming my voice, my power, and my essence. My quest for revenge was never about stooping to their level, but about ascending beyond it, showcasing the robustness and elegance inherent in my spirit. I am Julie, reborn from adversity, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, ready to soar to unprecedented heights and leaving the remnants of my past far behind in the dust. Alright, this is one of those rare occasions where I feel compelled to share my situation. Normally, I handle these things privately, but this particular issue has grown far too complex to manage alone. Let me start from the beginning. In my household, my husband, Bobby, has an incredibly close relationship with his family, especially his parents. His devotion to them runs so deep that he fulfills their every request without question, regardless of how unreasonable it may seem. This unwavering loyalty has started to become a problem. The Bobby refuses to acknowledge it. Every time I try to talk to him about it, he becomes defensive and dismisses my concerns. The main issue, and the reason I'm seeking advice, is that Bobby has always gone above and beyond for his parents. From the very start of our marriage, he's felt obligated to indulge their wishes. I understand the importance of caring for one's parents. I would do the same if mine lived closer. But there has to be a limit. Unfortunately, Bobby doesn't see it that way. Since we both started earning steady incomes, his parents have often asked us for money. The strange thing is, they aren't struggling financially. In fact, they live quite comfortably and can easily afford their own luxuries. At first, I went along with it because, well, they're his parents and I wanted to respect that. But as time went on, I started feeling uneasy. We sent them so much money over the years, enough that we could have taken a few international vacations by now. I've tried explaining to Bobby that while we're doing fine financially, it's irresponsible to keep funneling so much of our extra income to his parents. We need to start thinking about our own future, saving for kids, buying a home, making significant purchases down the line. At first, he seemed to understand where I was coming from, but before long, the conversation turned into an argument. He insisted that since we're living comfortably, why shouldn't we help his parents out with the extra money? It's not that I want to stop helping them altogether. I just think there needs to be a balance between supporting them and taking care of our own future. That's what I'm struggling with, finding that balance. Bobby, however, remains firm in his decision to keep supporting his parents financially, and it's driving a wedge between us. The situation has frustrated me to the point where I almost walked out during one of our arguments. My anger boiled over when I remembered how his parents treated me in the past. If they had ever made me feel like part of the family, maybe I could be more understanding. But they never accepted me. They weren't there for us when we needed them most. I can still remember when Bobby and I were just starting out, fresh out of college and barely making ends meet. We went to his parents, hoping for a little help to buy our first home, only to be met with cold refusal. They didn't even take a moment to consider our situation. Instead, we were lectured about adult responsibilities and how we needed to learn to save for ourselves. It was less about offering guidance and more about dismissing our struggles entirely. And now, years later, here we are, sending them money they don't even need, while Bobby refuses to see the bigger picture. Despite my frustrations, I don't know how to get through to him. I bit my tongue, choosing to keep my thoughts to myself. It was disheartening to see Bobby's parents so unwilling to help their own son, but I resigned myself to accept their decision if Bobby could make peace with it. However, the issue resurfaced about a year and a half ago when I inherited a house from my mother. It was a lovely property, but it needed major renovations. While we had saved some money, it wasn't nearly enough to cover the necessary repairs. This recurring pattern, needing financial assistance and being repeatedly rejected by Bobby's parents, who nonetheless had no issue asking us for money, began to strain how I viewed our relationship dynamics. The constant tug of war over finances exposed a painful imbalance. They were more than willing to take from us but refused to offer help when we needed it most. Faced with the challenge of making the inherited house livable, we decided to approach his parents again, hoping this time they might be willing to lend a modest sum. Unfortunately, they refused once more. This time, they told us to stop asking for their money and to figure things out on our own. They even suggested I sell the house, dismissing it as a waste of space and something that looks like crap. Their words cut deep. This house wasn't just a property to me, it was a cherished connection to my mother, filled with memories and sentimental value. I bit back my hurt and anger, thinking it would be impolite to react at the time, though part of me now wishes I had spoken up. Maybe if I had, their blatant disregard for our situation might not have been so bold. But instead, I chose to let it go. Determined not to let their rejection stop me, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I worked tirelessly, scraping together funds, and poured every bit of my effort into the renovations. Slowly but surely, as I started earning more, the project became more manageable. After months of hard work, the house was completely transformed into something beautiful. A home I was incredibly proud of, a testament to my dedication. A few months later, I finally had the chance to show off what I had accomplished. I invited my in-laws over for dinner to celebrate my mother-in-law's birthday, and by that time, the house looked stunning. I was proud of all the hard work I had put into transforming it and hoped the evening would go smoothly. Typically, our family gatherings are peaceful as long as the conversation doesn't revolve around money, which is always a sensitive topic with them. When they arrived and saw the renovations, I could tell they were taken aback. Their eyes widened as soon as they stepped inside, clearly surprised by how much the house had changed. Internally, I felt a small sense of satisfaction, knowing they hadn't expected me to achieve such a dramatic transformation. They complimented the house profusely, which was flattering at first, but soon their praise began to feel overwhelming. They started inspecting every corner, asking detailed questions about how much everything had cost. At first, I tried to brush it off as natural curiosity. After all, they knew we hadn't had a lot of extra money to spare, and they hadn't contributed a dime to the renovations. But as their questions continued, it became clear their interest wasn't about admiring the hard work. I could feel them tallying up the expenses in their heads, trying to figure out exactly how much we had spent. It was intrusive, almost demeaning, as if the value of my efforts could only be measured by how much money we had poured into the project. The dinner itself started off well enough, with light, enjoyable conversation, but things quickly shifted when my mother-in-law brought up the subject of dream vacations. She asked me about my ideal getaway, but I could tell by her tone and her disinterested expression that she wasn't really listening. It felt like she was just waiting for me to finish speaking. Her sudden excitement after my brief response seemed forced, which only heightened my suspicions. And soon, the real reason for their visit emerged. They wanted us to help finance a vacation home. After years of refusing to help us when we needed it, here they were, asking us to contribute to a luxury they desired, a vacation home, no less. They were well off and more than capable of saving for it themselves, so why were they turning to us for help? It became clear that they had assumed, based on the renovations I had managed to complete, that we must be flush with cash. Nothing could have been further from the truth. When I asked them to explain why they needed a vacation home, their answer was simply that they were bored and wanted a change of scenery for weekends. I was shocked by their sense of entitlement. I calmly explained that we didn't have extra money to spare for something so extravagant, but then Bobby's reaction stunned me. He turned to me with a look of disbelief, as if I had just committed a terrible offense. "Spending on my parents' happiness is never a waste," he said coldly, his glare making it clear he didn't share my frustration at their request. I had to be careful with my words, though the situation left me baffled and hurt. Bobby's reaction highlighted a deeper issue in our relationship, our differing priorities and understanding of financial responsibility. Deep down, Bobby knew I was right. A vacation home was hardly a necessity, certainly not a matter of life and death. His father still had a job, and they could easily save up for such a luxury on their own. But instead of doing that, they seemed intent on having us finance their comfort. Then it hit me. Bobby wasn't an only child. He had an older brother, Jack, so why weren't they asking him for the money? When I brought this up, the mood in the room shifted, and I could feel the tension rise. It turned out they didn't want to burden Jack because he wasn't as financially stable, or so they claimed. He had children, they argued, and his expenses were focused on his family. I pointed out that Jack's financial situation wasn't all that different from ours. He earned about the same, but his money went toward his children. I mentioned that Bobby and I planned to start a family soon, and continually supporting his parents could jeopardize our ability to provide for our future kids. Their response was dismissive. Since we didn't have children yet, they argued we should have plenty of funds to spare. What followed was an onslaught of emotional manipulation, though it wasn't directed at me. They knew I wouldn't bend. Instead, they aimed their pleas at Bobby, lamenting their loneliness and boredom now that both of their sons were busy with their own lives. They painted the vacation home as a solution to their isolation, and Bobby, always the dutiful son, swayed by their emotional appeal. I found myself in a delicate situation, trying to navigate these increasingly fraught discussions without letting my in-laws realize they had backed us into a corner. But things took a drastic turn just a week ago. Bobby and I had the worst argument we've ever had, though it never turned physical. His words cut deep. He told me that the $420,000 he planned to give his parents wasn't just mine to decide on. He claimed he had been considerate in the past by asking for my opinion, but no longer felt obligated to seek my approval. The argument hit its peak when he went ahead and transferred the money to his parents, without any further discussion with me. I only found out when my mother-in-law casually mentioned receiving the funds as if it were no big deal. I was furious, not just about the money, but about the blatant disrespect for our shared decision-making in our marriage. Bobby's secretive actions left me feeling deeply betrayed, sparking a fierce debate over our financial priorities and the respect we owed each other. He knew I opposed his decision, yet he went ahead and donated the entire $420,000 he had saved over the years to his parents, leaving us with nothing. When I confronted him and urged him to retrieve the funds, he dismissed me outright, insisting he would manage his relationship with his parents on his own. Despite my reminders that significant financial decisions should be made together, he wouldn't hear it. Our disagreement seemed to have worn him down. In the heat of our argument, he shockingly threatened me with divorce. He shouted that if I interfered with his choice to support his parents financially, he would leave me. The absurdity of it hit me hard. I had stood by him through every high and low, and now he was willing to abandon our marriage for the sake of his parents' desires over our shared future. I couldn't help but question whether he cared at all about the plans we had made together. Building a life, having children, and finding happiness as a unit. It seemed to me that none of it mattered to him anymore. His focus was solely on fulfilling his parents' wishes while I felt neglected and sidelined. In a moment of anger, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. A week has passed since that day, and he hasn't come home. Despite my countless texts, calls, and voicemails, he continues to ignore me or leave me hanging. The hurt runs deep. I never imagined something like this could drive Bobby away. When I reached out to my in-laws, I discovered he had been staying with them since he left. He hasn't returned home even once. I'm overwhelmed with stress and confusion, grappling with the fear that our marriage could be ending over what feels like a trivial disagreement yet is so profound. As the days stretch into more than a week without Bobby, the uncertainty of our future looms heavily over me. I had reached a pivotal moment. Initially, I was hesitant, unsure if severing ties was truly the right decision, but the ongoing chaos, coupled with the blatant disregard from Bobby and his family, solidified my resolve. If Bobby was threatening divorce, then perhaps that was the inevitable path we were headed toward. So I took the initiative and contacted my lawyer that very morning. During our conversation, my lawyer laid out my options, not only regarding the divorce but also potential legal actions given the circumstances. As we spoke, another stark realization hit me. I no longer wanted to be tied down by the memories within the walls of the house my mother had left me. Once a symbol of her love, the house had become a constant reminder of the tumultuous times with Bobby. Determined to move forward, I made the decision to sell the house. It was entirely in my name, a final gift from my mother, which legally allowed me to sell it without Bobby's consent. The sale turned out to be quite profitable, providing me with the financial security I needed to navigate the legal proceedings ahead. The very next day, after finalizing the divorce papers, I had them sent to Bobby. I knew exactly when he received them because my phone rang almost immediately afterward. It was Bobby, furious, incredulous. He ranted about how absurd I was being, claiming he had been planning to file for divorce anyway. His shock only deepened when he learned about the legal actions I had already initiated. The call was heated, filled with accusations and disbelief, marking a clear turning point in what had become an irreparable rift. Bobby completely lost his temper during the conversation, and as his anger escalated, I realized I couldn't take it any longer. Midway through his tirade, I hung up on him. As the days led up to the court case, I was a bundle of nerves. My mind was flooded with worries about the potential outcomes. What if the court ruled against me? What if I ended up losing everything, including the money? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I knew I had to push through to see this to the end. Despite my fears about the future, I didn't allow them to overwhelm me. I dressed confidently, put on my best smile, and walked up to the courthouse, ready to face whatever lay ahead. It was the day of the final hearing for our divorce, and to my surprise, everything turned out incredibly well. Not only was I able to keep all the proceeds from the sale of the house, but the court also ordered Bobby to pay me a substantial amount in alimony, fulfilling his legal obligation. This outcome was unexpected, especially receiving more money from Bobby, but it felt justified given the emotional and mental toll his actions had taken on me. Accepting this money felt like a reclaiming of my dignity. The disapproval and shock on my in-laws' faces as the verdict was read brought me a sense of vindication. They likely never anticipated that their manipulation would backfire so severely. They had thought they could exert control over me without consequences, but instead, they ended up losing significantly. Since then, life has been relatively calm. I did receive a harsh call from my mother-in-law who criticized my actions, accusing me of selfishness and lacking the ability to care for others. She even went as far as to say I would never be able to start my own family. Despite her words, I've been able to move forward. I used the money from the house sale to secure a new apartment for myself, where I could finally save without the constant pressure and demands from others. However, a part of me still questions the measures I took. Was taking him to court too extreme? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, so please share your opinions in the comments below. The situation took a surprising turn, but I felt it was necessary under the circumstances. As I scrolled through the comment section of my latest post, the range of opinions was striking. Some commenters defended Bobby, questioning what was the big deal about giving his parents $420,000 if he had $550,000. On the other hand, many disagreed vehemently, supporting my perspective. They pointed out that we had been financially assisting his parents for years while trying to establish our own financial security and save for a house. The debate in the comments was clearly divided. A significant number criticized my decision to sell the house and keep the money, labeling it disrespectful, given that the house was legally in my name. However, about half of the commenters backed my actions, asserting that it was exactly what I needed to do in light of the circumstances. So let's open this up for further discussion. Drop your comments below, and let's dive deeper into this situation.